Thank you. That makes it better. Appreciate it. Kim has been appointed to head the Fort Worth A&M's new research initiative here in downtown Fort Worth, adjacent to the law school, and that's a great accomplishment for you, a great opportunity. And I had the privilege last week of being, or was that early? That was early this week. It was Monday. This has been a long week. Of being at a luncheon where Dr. James Hurley, who's the president of the Tarleton State University, spoke along with John Sharp, the A&M chancellor. And John Sharp, Chancellor Sharp, talked a lot about the A&M's plans relative to the new downtown Fort Worth development. So that's a great step. That is a giant step forward, and it's going to be exciting to see what comes out of it. So congratulations. Okay, first thing on our agenda this morning is to receive a welcome from Reginald Gates. Reginald is the Vice Chancellor for Communications and External Affairs here at Tarrant County College. And I've known Reg for a long time. He has occupied or had the opportunity to lead a lot of different initiatives here in the Metroplex. He is former CEO of the Fort Worth Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce. He did so well there. He wound up in Dallas as CEO of the Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce over there. He's done a number of other things, but he's been here at TCC for, where'd he go? Well, he's hiding. I looked out here. I didn't see he's hiding over here. This is not usual for him. Reg, come on up. He's how long have you been with TCC? 12 years. He's been here at TCC and greatly involved. I've been on the TCC board about 2.5 years, I guess it is. And he is omnipresent. He is everywhere, and he's greatly involved in what's going on here at TCC. So, Reg?
Thank you, sir. Good morning. It's times like these when you wish things were being recorded. When your trustee says great things like that, and you want to remind them later about it. Good morning to each of you, and welcome to the Trinity River Complex. I'll talk in a moment a little bit about the complex and what all is embodied in this building. But I thought instead of doing the talking head piece, we'd show you a short clip that quickly takes you through TCC with some data, but more visual about how we're spread across the county. And I thought it might give you a good feel for TCC and some of what we do. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about this campus. So, John, if you want to cue that up. Now imagine had I tried to say all of that in a welcome. Would have been a bit difficult. So a little bit about this campus. So we consider this the Trinity River Complex. So there are several components within this complex. Obviously, the Trinity River campus, where the academics and student activity takes place. This was formerly the Radio Shack World Headquarters. Most of you probably know that. So the Trinity River campus is here. The TCC Connect, which is our online campus, is also located in this building. The administrative offices moved here last summer, so we're located in this office. Then also the TCC Foundation, you saw the clip about scholarships, they're located here. The boardroom where we conduct our meetings is across the hall from where you are. As you entered off of what we call Main Street, when you come off the parking lot, we call that area of the building Main Street. So you passed our award-winning Riverfront Cafe that the public accesses on a regular basis. Folks serving jury duty come over here for lunch. So today, good thing, I think you all having lunch here in the room, because at 11:30 there's a stampede of high school students that comes down this hallway on their way to the lunchroom. So you don't want to get in their way, number one. They're actually Fort Worth ISD students with the Texas Academic Biomedical classes that are on this wing of the building. Charlton State occupies the 5th floor section of this building, so they have their extension classes here. So there's just a lot of activity that goes on in the building. Down the street is where we do all of our allied health professions, our nursing programs, things along that line. So there's so much that takes place in this building, and we're excited because it's probably as well used by the public as it is by us. We're clear when we talk about serving the community that this is your facility. So we're glad to have you here today, and feel free to come back. Maybe you do a tour or something along those lines. But the whole notion of thinking of TCC as a center of excellence is what we want the taxpayer, the student, the community to understand about what we're doing. So we have very unique things that go on at each campus. Obviously, you can access general studies at any of the campuses, but we have some unique things that go on at each of our campuses that we want to expose the public to, and we think no better way than to talk to groups like this, because you become our ambassadors as you move around in the community. So I just want to say welcome, congratulations for what you're doing, not only as a profession, but also to be part of this community. This is truly the Fort Worth way. So congratulations and good morning.
Thank you, Reg. Thanks for being here and welcoming us here. We're going this morning to have a discussion, a panel talking with us about leadership. LeaderPrime is a leader program, a program about developing leadership. In the past, I think we've really concentrated on connecting the people who have been in the class to the community, and we did that in our last two meetings. Today, we're going to talk about how leadership works and how you can improve and enhance your leadership skills. And we've got some people that are very qualified to help us with that. First of all, our moderator for the panel is T.D. Smyers, and T.D. bills himself as a CEO, coach, and consultant. I first got to know T.D. when he came here to serve as the commanding officer of the Naval Air Station in Fort Worth, the Joint Reserve Base. He's got had an interesting career, and I'm going to read a little bit of his background for you. He currently leads Simple Leadership Strategies as Chief Executive Officer while maintaining a limited coaching and strategy consultancy for a few select clients. Before taking on his current leadership development roles, TD took a 2-year career pause to cruise the U.S. Atlantic coast, the Bahamas, the Caribbean, with his wife Barbara aboard the sailing catamaran La Via de Sante. Okay. I don't know a whole lot of people that just stop mid-career or well into their career and take off and go cruise all over this part of the world. But he did that, and I think that's a testimony to him being somewhat of a unique individual. TD has occupied a number of different, or led a number of different efforts here in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. He's been president and CEO of the United Way of Tarrant County, regional CEO of the North Texas American Red Cross, and had a 31-year career in the U.S. Navy, United States Navy, from which he retired in 2011 at the rank of captain. His final role was here at the Fort Worth Joint Reserve Base, and he's done everything like be Director of Congressional Affairs for the Navy, Director of Collaborative Warfare for the Naval Aviation, for Naval Aviation at the Pentagon, and Commander of Patrol Squadron 62 in Jacksonville, Florida. So he got an interesting background, and you'll find he is not a timid soul. Also on the panel with him this morning is Dr. Tommy Nichols. Dr. Nichols is an associate professor of management and the associate dean at the School of Business at Texas Wesleyan University. His primary research interests include leadership, organizational behavior, and generational pedagogy. Never can say that word. Teaching, yeah. You know, that's a word I wasn't really familiar with till I got here to TCC, and they talk about that all the time. I still can't pronounce it. He lives in Springtown, Texas, with his wife and 2 kids and 2 dogs, and we're really pleased that he's with us here today. Next, in the middle over here is Tracy Rockett, is a professor of management practice at the Neely School at TCU. She teaches classes and leads workshops on a wide variety of topics, including teams, leadership, power and politics. That ought to be interesting. Negotiations, culture, and innovation. And we're pleased she's here. And here next to me is Dr. David Mack. Dr. Mack has been involved with LeaderPrime, I guess, since we started. He was the you were associate dean of the College of Business and a clinical professor of management at the University of Texas in Arlington. He has been UTA's representative to LeaderPrime, and he's very faithful in being here and being a part of what we do. He retired a couple of years ago for about 30 days, and then he went back, and he's back at UTA and continues to be involved there. A good friend and a great participant with us in LeaderPrime. For with that, TD, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor Barr, for that very gracious introduction and an introduction to this panel. So can everybody hear me in the back okay? Is it not too loud either? It's not blasting you out? Okay, cool. My name is T.D. Smyers. I'm happy to be here. I was sitting where you were several years ago when I went through LeaderPrime. It was a great program, so I hope you all have had as great a time as I remember having. And because I sat in your seat, not only in LeaderPrime, but also as a leader with authority and accountability for an organization, for several of them in Fort Worth, I really wanted to structure this panel to be something that would be additive to you, not just a panel on leadership, because let's face it, you're leaders, and you've all trod that path to get where you are now. So for us, it was let's find something that's that fits, something that's helpful to you as you leave here and seek to lead your organizations. I am really, really privileged to not only have to my right some really, really smart people, but some people that I've got to know over the past couple of months since we formed as a panel to come here. We've met, we've dined together, we've drank together. We were going to drink this morning, but I couldn't pack Bloody Marys, so you have me sober. And would have been a lot more lucid, right? But just to add a little bit to Mayor Barr's description, Dr. Tommy Nichols to my right never grew into Thomas or Tom, so he's Tommy. He's Dr. Tommy Nichols. I loved it when I read too that one of his research topics was generational pedagogy. I'm like, do you want to admit that? It's on recording. But apparently he's a teacher of teaching. which is kind of cool. Professor Tracy Rockett, who has the coolest supervillain name of anybody on the panel, Professor Rockett, has also just been named director for TCU's new online professional MBA program, which is kind of cool. So that's just happened, a recent thing, so congratulations, Professor Rockett. And then our sage down there at the end, Dr. David Mack, was the director of the Goolsby Leadership Academy for over a decade. So he was just talking with us before we went live about teaching an MBA program in China. So you know, if you're like I am, how many of you that are leaders of organizations read leadership books? Sure, yeah, we all do, because we're seeking to grow. You have the benefit here of three folks who have dedicated their time to studying leadership, to interacting with the people we're going to talk about, and to being leaders in their own right in academia. So really power-hitting panel here. And so well, let's get on with it. You guys ready? Yeah. All right, so we chose a topic that we hope is vibrant and alive. The 80s called and they want their top-down leadership back. Wow. So just to show you how cool we're jiving as a group up here, Professor Rockett sends me this quote that kind of tees this up really nice. It's a quote from the CEO of Brooks Running, Jim Weber, and he was asked the question, what do you think is the biggest misconception about good leadership today? And his comment was really, really brief. I think that the whole command and control thing is a relic. It's about engaging people and creating a North Star, a purpose, so that the team is going to give as much as they get. So what's the misconception? The misconception is that you can command and control your way to really creating value and culture. If you want to attract great talent, you've got to create purpose and mission and an opportunity for those people. Makes sense to me. So here we are, distinguished panel, in 2022. And we grew up, I grew up, and a lot of you grew up in here. I mean, you're looking at it at the LeaderPrime group, and you're seeing some boomers and some senior millennials that are now in charge of leading organizations. Does anybody here identify with a different generational group?
Probably
Right?
Gen X.
Gen X, right? Well,
We get forgotten every time, right?
Gen X,
It is.
right? And then the folks that are on your teams are largely Gen Zs, and maybe the younger, the younger millennials and Gen Xs. So you've got some generational divide. Is that divide so different in our concepts and perceptions of what's required of us, what earns our trust, what earns our loyalty, that we need to adjust our leadership from what we all learned as we were growing up, the kind of top-down approach to command and control? Who wants to kick that one off?
Yes, next question.
It's going to be about a 15-minute panel. No, I mean, dig into that a little bit. What is it in the expectations of the workforce? I mean, we all read about it, right? We read about what's going on with the Great Resignation. We read about what's going on with people leaving roles. I mean, when I first read about the Great Resignation, I thought that can't be true. People got to eat, but people are finding ways to do things themselves, to start their own businesses. What do we need to know as leaders to attract that great talent and retain it and have it aligned in unity with what we're doing?
First off, it's great to be here, and congratulations to all of you for doing this. It's a wonderful program, and I hope that this leads to continued involvement in this wonderful community from all of you. That's what it's really all about. There's no free lunches in this setup. I think, probably everybody in this room, what got you to the leadership position that you're in today is not going to get you in the future to where you want to be. Anybody in here disagree that the world has changed? It changed years ago. Even add the pandemic into that. You look at the impact that technology has had, that globalization has had. Somebody mentioned I've been to China. I've been to China 33 times to teach executive MBAs and whatnot, and I've gotten a pretty good idea of what the folks are like over there. And they're a lot like us in more ways than they're different. But the world is so complex today, and work is so complex today. It's impossible anymore for us to be the leaders that we were in the past. And understand, this is a very genetic thing. The animal kingdom has these same issues. You look at buffaloes, gorillas, you name it, elephants. they very much are a command and control type of society. When the elephants run into a problem, everybody comes to a stop and they turn, they look for the old guy with the silver hair and say, hey, fix this problem. And that's what many of us has made us successful, is we're problem fixers. And today, though, we can't do that, not effectively. And there's a whole topic called adaptive leadership that I'm not going to get into because that's a whole other session by itself. But we have to learn as leaders to help our employees become the problem solvers because they're the most qualified to do that. And that is not an easy task, I can tell you. It is a real challenge. It takes a lot of emotional intelligence. Hopefully you're familiar with that term. It takes a lot of work to get there because you essentially have to transform it because they want to stop and turn and look at you and say, boss, got a problem here, come fix it for me. And if you do that, that's okay, but it really doesn't solve the problem because unless they look at it and change it systemically, and actually fix the problem instead of just solving that problem, then probably your organization's not going to progress and your competition's going to eat you alive.
So when I was growing up, the concept that kind of aligned with that, but it's still part of the old command and control leadership model, was delegation and empowerment, right? Even to the point where I remember my first commanding officer saying, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions, right? We all grew up with that. What does that look like in the eyes of today's workforce, though? Why is that a different perspective that they have now than the one I had, which was, I've got to find out what this culture is about and get online with what the organization wants me to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think this generation, the younger generations, they want empowerment still. Like, that's something they're looking for. I think one of the big differences generationally, though, is access and expectations about feedback. So, whereas for older leaders, no news is good news. Once a year is fine. And then you go down and you find, quarterly is good. This generation is frequent feedback all the time. They really want to know and to calibrate. So rather than delegating and saying, go fix this, they want to have touch points with you. Am I in the right, in the right direction here? Where do I need to pivot a little bit? That sort of thing. So you can't just hand off and expect them to go do things. And it's not because they can't be trusted or because they don't know what they're doing. It's more just they have that relationship style of feedback, and that feeds into their trust and the relationship building with you.
That makes a lot of sense. I remember one comment that Dr. Nichols made early when we were having drinks that one night was, I can't remember since I was drinking. I'm just kidding. It was, the generation that we're talking about were born with a feedback mechanism in their hands, right? These things. And so that plays to what you're talking about. They've just kind of come to have that in every aspect of their life relationally. Mm-hmm. So then they apply it to the workplace. Makes a lot of sense.
And to add on to what Tracy said, I stole this from another Gen Z researcher, and they did the same thing. Asked students, okay, if I let's say I gave you a test, and it was unfair. There was nothing from the textbook in there. The questions were difficult. They didn't make sense, and I didn't give you much preparation for it. What would you do? Now you got a bad grade on it. What would you do? And all of them to a person said, well, I'd make an appointment with you, and I'd come to your office, and we'd talk about that. And I said, and here's the interesting part. Now, what do you think your parents would have done? And about 90% of them said, same thing. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not what happened when I was in college or in high school. I got a bad grade. I talked bad behind their back. So the point being is that their perspective is different. Right? And they do have that feedback mechanism. They don't, Dr. Mack was saying, they don't need us for authority when it comes to facts and how to do things. They've got that. They need us for other things, to teach them. Credibility is important to them, but how do you do that, right? Trust is important to them, but how do you do that? That's what they need us for.
See, I'd love to hear the perspective of some of the other panelists on that concept of trust is important to them, but what does that look like to them? I mean, trust and loyalty from an 80s growth perspective, right? Growing up as a leader then looks like unity of effort. It looks like, believing in the organization and being part of its ultimate success. Why does that look different today?
One of the things, you talked about a little bit earlier was the great resign. 60% of your employees right now are thinking about changing jobs. 40% of them are actively engaged in changing jobs. And you might think, oh, well, more money, we hear about all these huge salaries and things we're getting or benefits, that type of thing. Number one reason is they don't like your company. Number two reason is they don't like you, okay? And that's not easy to hear sometimes. But this generation, we talked about this somewhat, every generation, my generation, I'm the oldest one here on this panel. My generation is you went to work and you did whatever you had to do to feed your family. My son's generation was more, well, wait a minute, I want something that's fulfilling. I want to have some free time and stuff. But his generation was willing to compromise. Say, ooh, a promotion, this big promotion, I can get a new car, so I'll surrender that value for now. The new generations that are coming in, they have those same values, but they're not going to surrender those values. They want those Thursday morning yoga classes. They want to believe in what their company does. They want to be treated fairly, and they want to be involved in the decision-making of your organization. And if they don't find that with you, they've got tons of other opportunities out there. So they're not going to change, okay? They're not going to change. You better.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because I think, you talked about kind of loyalty to the company and to the mission. There is no psychological contract for these students coming out now. It has been broken, and it was already like hanging by a thread, but then COVID happened. And I had a number of students who had jobs in hand and were going to graduate, and then those job offers disappeared. And so they were already a bit mistrustful, and then that happened, and they're like, nope, we're done. And I've had students, former students who've come back and said that they've left a company because they felt that the company was micromanaging them, that they were monitoring them, that they were, continually like in their space, and they didn't feel like they had the autonomy they needed and wanted. So they would leave that job even without a job in hand, which seems terrifying to somebody like me. But they're all about their principles, and if you can build that trust with them, it's not about the organization anymore, and this is our mission, but our personal relationship. And for this generation, in particular, I think two things are critical. One is authenticity, and the other is empathy. And so as a leader, if you can demonstrate both authenticity and empathy, that goes a long way in terms of creating those relationships and keeping those employees who could jump ship for more money pretty much anywhere else, but they'll stay loyal if you have that strong relationship with them.
Yeah, and talking about that relationship, that's exactly what they want. They want a relationship with their employer. Just like any one of us might want a relationship. But because of that authenticity piece, they can figure out if you're lying, if you're not genuine. They are very socially aware, and that's very, very important to them. But also diversity is very important. They only recognize diversity if it's not there. And because of that, you don't necessarily even have to have value alignment, right? You have to have values, and you have to show that you care about those values, and they'll respect that. But they want to know that you do care, and it's part of that relationship building, and they want to see that it's authentic.
That's actually probably good news, right? Because who didn't grow up learning how to be a leader at some point, coming through management, and discovering that authenticity was what really needed to underlie everything you did anyway, right? I think everybody probably grasps that, and you've seen it yourself. How many of you could see through a leader that wasn't authentic, that was putting on a front? I remember actually getting counsel from a senior officer in the Navy asking what veneer I was going to put on for a role. And my response was, I don't even know what that looks like. I mean, again, he was advising against he was advising on a path that was lacking authenticity. So I think that's a good news. I think that's maybe a bridge where we can take stuff that we've all seen that's important and maybe, implement it toward this group, or what does that What is that, so just in terms of tools, let's bring it down to kind of practical application. You know, we've talked about authenticity, we've talked about principled leadership and having the workforce come on board with the mission of the organization, and not just come on board and join it, but actually develop a relationship and maybe be part of producing it, right? So what are some practical applications of that, methods to use in the workforce that help harness that?
Well, one thing I think is getting back to the feedback, and it also connects to authenticity, is communicate. Be out front and communicate regularly with your people. And I'm not saying communicate in the sense that you're micromanaging, checking in, how are you doing, what's going on, you know, that little, you know, checking in stuff, but more of the big, you know, these are the things we're doing. This is why we're here together. How do we work together to get there? Admitting when you make a mistake and being very open and transparent about that, modeling that vulnerability. When they talk to people during kind of the peak of COVID, when people were really stressed, you know, they were at home, many with kids, with family members, that sort of thing. They were really stressed, and they said that they valued those leaders who were empathetic, but also modeled vulnerability themselves. So, you know, sent out an email and said, hey, you know, this is a tough time for everyone. I'm struggling. Here's how I'm struggling. Let's just take a mental health day and not do some work today, right? And let's reconvene tomorrow, right? So that communication, the communication with intention to model the behaviors you want, and to trust your employees as you hope that they'll trust you.
I think you also have to look at, do your employees really know what you do? We've all heard the story, right, about the CEO or visitor touring a hospital, and there's a janitor there sweeping up, and or say, hey, what do you do here at the hospital? And he goes, we save lives. Because that's what we do, is we save lives, and I'm a part of that. You'd be amazed, because we teach them, you'd be amazed how many of your employees don't really understand what your organization is about. They really don't, at a very basic level. And the other thing they don't know, because we don't tell them, is how does your organization make money? Where does the money go? Anybody know who Dan Dipert is? Runs a big travel company over in Arlington. And he does a great job. He says he takes a $1 bill and he meets with all of his employees. And he says, okay, says, how much do you think goes for purchasing buses and stuff? And he goes, okay, well, 70 cents. He goes, how much do you think goes for payroll and that type of thing? Well, there's 20 cents. And so he keeps going through this whole thing, and he goes, so what's left for me? 7 cents. Anybody begrudge me that 7 cents? And we're like, no, that's great. We're glad you got something. You should get something out of this. Your employees can handle that information, and they know that you have to be profitable. You know, you've got to have more money coming in than you have going out. They can handle that kind of information, and they want that. They want their company to be healthy. But don't be afraid to share that information. Make them true partners in your organizations. They should know all of that stuff. They should know, every one of them should know what they contribute on an annual basis to the bottom line of your organization, and they should be proud of that.
That's one thing that's very particular. You know, we talk so much of this stuff. You might be thinking, well, yeah, but that's everybody. What's different perhaps about Generation Z? And I think that difference is that joined ranks, right? They've got TikTok, right? And they learn a lot from that. And it's not all bad, right? And they saw what happened to the millennials. Google this for me, right? Millennials ruined, you'll get anything from mayonnaise to society, right? Man, how did they ruin, anyway. So they've joined ranks and said, you know, we're not doing this. Before you know it, they're going to accuse us of ruining mustard and ketchup. So we're not going to have this, right? And so they do talk to each other, and they have, I think you called it a tribal identity, right? And because it is almost a reaction, and they're very much aware, and so they want the transparency. They talk to one another, and as Dr. Mack was saying, they want a seat at the table, not to make the decisions, but to know the inner workings, right? They want to know the why. Mm-hmm. Back to my example of asking them what they do about that test. It was all about the why. Whereas maybe when I was growing up, I didn't always ask the why. I was curious about it, but there was an authority figure. It was a command and control system. I didn't ask the why. they are definitely asking the why. There was a Randstad study that came out recently that said 56% of Gen Zers would either not take a job or quit their job if it got in the way of their personal lives. And on the surface, that might be a little bit like, whoa, that's selfish or shocking. But what they've learned is, and primarily through the pandemic, is that they can have their cake and eat it too. They saw their parents doing it all of a sudden, working from home and being with them. And so they understand that it's possible and that this is a society with technology that can make that possible, and they don't have to choose your company if you don't offer that.
Well, this has been insightful for me as somebody who grew up always focusing on unity, right? Unity of effort, organizational unity. For the first 31 years of my professional life, my group I was with was defined by the patch we wore on our sleeve of our flight suit. That's what unified all of us. And we came from all over the world, literally, countries all over the world. The U.S. Navy was a very, very diverse and inclusive organization. And but unity was what we always fought for. So I struggled initially when we started getting into this topic, reading things online posted by some of the younger folks in the workforce. Never take a job in which you can't speak your truth at work. And at first I was like, well, I mean, it's not about your truth. It's about stamping the best widgets, right? Or it's about achieving the mission, or it's about, right, could be becoming part of something larger than yourself. Mm-hmm. But seeing now how it's not necessarily mutually exclusive to the attitudes that the younger folks in the workforce have. It's just a little bit of a different nuance. They want to become part of that solution. They want to feel like they have ownership of that solution. Seems like. Any other comments on that,
Yeah,
Professor?
I think they want, I think they want to be a part of something. It's not that they have no interest in it, but they bring their identity to work in a way that I think most of us didn't. So they talk very particularly about being seen. And it's different than my generation, which we talked about being heard. They want to be seen for who they are and the contributions they make to the organization. And this gets back to the point that you made about diversity and being important to them. They want to be valued for who they are as a contributing member of that team. And they're more than happy to be a part of that team, but they want to be recognized as individuals as well. So when you say things like there's no I in team, that does not resonate with them at all whatsoever. They want to be me and they want to be us at the same time, which is a little bit different, I think.
That's a great point.
I remember, Tommy, you kind of drew that distinction once, yourself about, the Gen Zers are proud that they're tribal. They've got an affinity as a group, whereas maybe some of the millennials that sought to distance themselves from being grouped, as a generational entity. So before we got started, Mayor Barr came up and he was talking to Dr. Mack at the end of the table, and Dr. Mack asked the mayor, "Is this a very interactive group?" And his response reminded me of the old truck commercial where the guy says, "Has that thing got a Hemi?" And the driver says, "You're about to find out." And so we're about to find out, because we're going to spend the next few minutes turning it over to you. The panel is at your disposal. So you've heard some comments, some discussion up here. Please participate in us and with us and ask some questions of our panelists. You stick up your hand and I'll point your direction, and we're rocking and rolling.
I think I want to direct this towards Thomas. And the question I have is, are the two different socks, is it by design?
Okay, so the question is about Dr. Nichols' socks. And this is a great story. He challenged me to the sock game, to up my sock game, and he blitzed it today. So Dr. Nichols, explain your socks.
Yeah, he told me to wear suit and funny socks. So this is all on TD. Now, these are my kids. I've got, let's see, which one I got on which? I got Ellie's my 16-year-old on the green sock, and Tapin's my 10-year-old on the left. And I'm going to be picking up Ellie later from school today, and again, she's 16, and I am going to have the opportunity to lift my pants up. And so that's one of the primary purposes of the socks, yes.
They're also starboard and port, and they're actually on the right feet, so that's pretty cool.
That was luck.
Okay, other questions? We had one over here, yes.
Julie, let me give you this, and we need to pass it around because we are recording this.
Thank you, Mayor.
So I heard you talk about that, the younger generation wants a seat at the table. I would like for you to expand on their views on becoming leaders. Do they want to become the director of others, or are they purely interested in this more collaborative, flat type of organization?
I don't think they necessarily expect to come out of college and be a CEO, right? But they do understand that to get there, there's a lot that they have to learn, and they're eager, and they're excited, and they don't want the bad rap that the millennials had either. So when I say having a seat at the table, I mean they want to know how the sausage is made, right? They want to know what is going on behind there instead of just the end product. And I don't know about you guys, but I see that in my class a lot. They're asking a different brand of questions, and it always revolves around, but why? But why? And that's what I mean about having a seat at the table. They know that there's a process. They know that they're not going to come out. But they also know that there's that possibility because they see their peers starting companies. There's a lot of Gen Z companies out there doing really well, and they understand that's a possibility, but they also know that they need to know the why to be able to even do that.
And I think there's definitely a democratization that they see and they believe in, because if you think about it, you know, as a new employee, never got to see the CEO and never got to speak to the CEO until you ascended to a certain level. These guys are tweeting and, posting and doing all kinds of things, and they are, getting responses from senior leaders, and they expect to be heard. And so I agree. I don't think that they all think that they're going to be leaders immediately. Many of them actually do aspire to leadership, but they believe that they have a voice, and their voice is equivalent to others.
And, let me remind you of one thing. There's never been a generation that didn't think that the next generation was going to take them to hell in a handbasket. I mean, it's all, ever since Adam and Eve, who, disappointed their father greatly, okay? It has been that way. And it was my generation. I had hair down to here, and, and I was just, we were running this country into the ground. This is going to be horrible, and Vietnam War and all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. That happens, okay? And because they're different than us in some ways, and of course they're different than us. They want to be, you'll say, well, why do kids and their grandparents get along so well? Because they share a common enemy. Okay, they want to be different than their parents, and they should be. That type of diversity is what really makes us strong. And one of your goals should be to make sure that you've got not diversity the way we typically think of it, but also diversity in the age of your employees. Great company here in Fort Worth, BNSF. Many years ago, they went through a period of almost 20 years where they didn't hire anybody. They just didn't. There was no reason. They were in a downsizing mode and that type of thing. And then all of a sudden they had to ramp that up, and so they started hiring people. Well, they had seniors, they had the baby boomers, and then they had 20-year-olds. And it's like, okay, these two just don't see each other at all. So one of the other things that's key in your organizations is to recognize the value of those different age groups, because they all bring something to the table. Just because they're young doesn't mean they don't have really good values and really strong values, and that they will add those values to the collective strength of your organization.
And I do think it's important to point out that there's a difference between time of life and generation. Mm-hmm. Right, mm-hmm. And it's those lines I think oftentimes get blurred. But so Gen Zs, they're the ones matriculating right now out of college into the workforce. The professor in me kind of wants to define this for you. Like millennials are 1980 to 1996, Gen Z 1996 to 2012-ish. But even that, I think, might be able to be expanded to all the kids that had their education interrupted by the pandemic. Because that's going to be life-changing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, and we haven't talked about pandemic very much, or the COVID at all, but this is going to change the way things are done in the future, and we're already seeing that. I think a lot of us assumed that Generation Z would fare the best from the pandemic because they're born with phones in their hands. But there was a study that showed that they came out the worst. And you think about it, this is just time of life. These are kids, right? And this was, so older generations, yeah, we rolled with it. We've been punched and we got back up. They hadn't gotten punched yet, right? And so they've not weathered this very well, and they need our help.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because one of the things I've seen is a difference this year. So I teach mostly juniors and seniors. And this year was the first year that I got kids who were in the middle of their freshman year when the pandemic hit. And there is, I mean, a huge difference in the students from last year and students from this year. Just the disconnect, the kind of almost depression about like what's coming next. And they really, again, that personal relationship is key because I found that like to engage students, it's not enough anymore to have the dog and pony show where you get up and you have an entertaining lecture and you have some exercises. You actually have to go out of your way to build those relationships with students to make them care because they are just done. And it's really sad. And I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see the kids who were in high school when this happened to them, right? Because there may even be a difference between those. So again, that empathy is so important because these students are struggling. I mean, they are struggling. The mental health issues that I've seen have gone through the roof. The requests from the dean of students, they're still, you know, having COVID and having to be out for 7 to 10 days and missing that work and stressing about that. And it has created a new normal, I think, where again, that trust is even more important than it was before because they're you know, just struggling.
And I think you can get part of that trust by having proactive mental well-being programs or affiliations at work where that can help them.
Yeah.
Because that's important to them. I have students coming up to me and saying, I didn't do my assignment because I have anxiety, because I've been stressed. That never happened in the past. And they are aware of their mental well-being.
And they talk about it, right?
Yes.
It's an open thing. And this is even pre-COVID. Like, this generation is open and honest and wants support in those ways that previous generations didn't.
Awesome.
At UTA, we have a very diverse student body in so many different ways. Economically, being one of them, we have a ton of first-generation students. And it's funny, we didn't know how this was going to go. I mean, you know, education changed more in the last 2 years than it has in the last 300. It's phenomenal what they have gone through. And if you talk to our students, about a third of them go, God, I hate this online stuff. It's just awful. A third of them go like, this is great. I don't ever have to come. I don't ever want to come back there again. And the other third are like, you know, who cares, one way or the other. But one of the things that we did some surveys with some of our students, one of the ones that just almost brings you to tears is, you know, we all, I'm assuming you all live fairly close around here and you know, you look like you're, you know, doing pretty well. I'm assuming you all have access to internet and that type of thing. We had students driving 25, 30 miles to get to a McDonald's so they could do their homework using McDonald's internet because they didn't have anything at home. I said, well, can't you go to your local library? You know, who has a library? You know, that doesn't exist. You can't, and these guys said, I can't emphasize how much these kids, I'm sorry, I can say that at my age, these kids have gone through in the last 2 years. And some of that's going to fall on you as employers to help them work through that because it's real. And I agree, we haven't even seen the real full iceberg, which is the high school kids that have had just major challenges coming through the system, and they're gonna come into our system. They're gonna come into this building, and we got to figure out how to get them, you know, up to snuff, or we're going to have major issues out there in the future, and that's not going to be easy. It's going to take a real investment from all of us to make that happen.
All right, thank you, Dr. Mack. I think we got a question in the back. Mayor Barr's got a mic up. Elise.
Hi, yes.
Yeah.
So thinking about back to the workforce, less about students, what are you learning about how this generation wants to have tough feedback delivered to them? Because what we're noticing is, you know, we've got 50 and 60-year-olds in management who are kind of like, suck it up, buttercup, right? And then you've got the 20 and 30-year-olds that there's just a higher level of sensitivity and willingness to show that they're upset. And so I would love some understanding of what the research is showing or what you're seeing.
So what I've seen is that they want you to give them feedback in writing, like by email or something like that, and set up a meeting and then talk with them about it. They don't like to be, they feel like they're being blindsided if you bring them in and you have a sit down with them because they're not prepared. So they like some feedback, and it doesn't have to be the entire thing, but these are the things we're going to discuss in our meeting when we get together, just to give you something to think about, and then in an in-person follow-up meeting. And granted, not everything's in person, so a lot of it happens by Zoom, and they tend to be okay with that. But really giving them something to kind of think about before they show up, so that they don't feel like it's out of left field.
And be prepared for them to bring their mother or father with them when they have that. No.
Well, go ahead, Doctor.
Say, being as you said, a teacher of teaching, best practice nowadays is if you're going to have a face-to-face class, you need an online component as well. And part of the lesson needs to be a video. And the shorter, the better. So if you can get feedback in a 6-second vine, you're there. But literally, 15 seconds to 30-second videos is what research is showing is the most effective teaching method. If you translate that into feedback, well, I don't know. I haven't seen the research on that, but I imagine there is a connection.
I had an experience I'll share with you. It was about 6 years ago, and my assistant came in and said, "Hey, we'll make up a name. Karen wants some time on your schedule." Karen was a young digital marketing person we had hired about 15 months earlier, and I said, "Sure, yeah, Karen's great. Put her on the calendar." So she came in and sat in my office, and I said, "Well, what can I help you with? You're doing a great job. Let's hear what you got for me." And she said, "Well, I've been here 18 months. No, 15 months, but okay." She said, "I've been here 18 months, and I'm not a director yet. And I don't understand. Why not?" I thought I was being punked. I looked for the cameras. But it gave me an opportunity to have a conversation with Karen about career management, about sustained superior performance, about the things that create promotions and being part of the organization. But it was a learning experience for me in terms of being more proactive about managing those kind of expectations. Because I was really caught by surprise by the question. Maybe I should have been, but I was. So, and I think
one other thing that you need to think about it, and it comes back to that emotional intelligence piece of it, is how do you approach that session, when they come in? And I love to use, so let me ask you a question. What did you learn from this situation? What did you learn? Or have you talked to any of your fellow workers and asked them for any feedback on how you handled this particular situation? They'll accept honest feedback. They really will, because they do want to do better, but they don't necessarily like being called into the principal's office and yelled at without any preamble to that. So that's one of my favorite phrases is, what have you learned from this situation? Because a lot of times you can get them to really start thinking about what happened, and and maybe over time start coming prepared to have that conversation instead of just walking in cold.
I've got a two-part question kind of playing off what you're talking about with COVID. But the first part is we've got two 20-something-year-old kids, and I work with a room full of 20-somethings, and they're all really mission-driven, bright, really amazing people. But they have a much more dismal view of the world than previous generations. And I think about that. It's not just COVID that's hit them. It's a lot of things that have hit them. And so as work leaders, how do we help them deal with that? That's a big question. I don't really know how to help them with that. And then the second part of that, it's even harder because we understandably have a lot of hybrid working on. So all these touch points we're talking about wanting to do are much harder to do remotely. So you don't interact with them as much as you would normally in the old days.
Yeah, this generation is very concerned about the state of the world. And so a couple of things. One is I think the point was made about having mental health services as part of the benefits that you offer and allowing time for that. I think the other thing is allowing for your employees to have some agency and maybe picking some things that they can do to give back. Because one of the things that we know that this generation is really interested in is in the extracurricular, like giving back. So they're drawn to organizations that give them a day a quarter to go do volunteer work and that sort of thing. So finding, and again, it doesn't have to be exactly the organization that they want to work with necessarily, but finding an organization, align yourself, letting them have some agency in, helping make the world a better place, that sort of thing.
And keep in mind that this generation has access to a tremendous amount of information. Some of it is actually true. And you wouldn't believe the number of young people out there that today believe the world's going to end in 3 or 4 years because of climate issues. Well, it's not. Okay, it doesn't mean that climate issues are not a significant challenge and that we shouldn't be concerned with it, but the world's not going to end in 3 years. You're going to make it to 25, all right, at least, maybe even 30 on this, and how are we going to get there? But no generation ever has been bombarded with the amount of information that this generation has. And it's constant, going all day on, because they're constantly dialed in on it. And sometimes it's, you just have to sit down and just have these conversations and say, hey, what's going on with you here? And somebody mentioned the mental health part of it, and that's a serious one to do this. If you're 19 years old and you think the world's going to end in 3 years, man, that's depressing.
And I would only add, just to lock arms with them, that, yeah, it does suck out there, but what can we do?
Yeah.
I know you care. What can we care about together? And that social
Common
awareness
ground.
issue. Find a common ground. And your values may be different than them, but you can find common value.
Thanks, panel, and we have one more question here in the front.
Yes, so thank you guys for being here. My question is related to sort of thinking about the intersectionality between, we're talking about generational sort of issues and the nuances associated with management of various generations. However, there's an increasing amount of complexity within each band based off of race specifically and gender. We have a lot of students of color who are finding their place in the world, and there's sort of a delay in terms of generation for the progress and social engagement and the ability to speak, quote, truth to power. So what does the research say about the intersectionality between this conversation about the generational divide and how that is exacerbated or attenuated by variances by race and gender?
The diversity, equity, inclusion has become almost a buzzword, right? And everybody's talking about it, and yes, we need to do it, but what are we actually doing about it? And I think that starts with the corporate culture, right? I was saying earlier, we need to lock arms. We need to lock arms with that as well. We have as much to learn from this generation as they have to learn from us. And they are aware, and probably more aware. They've experienced it differently than we have. And if we give them that respect to say, hey, what are these issues? What do we do about diversity and gender? First off, the question is going to be weird to them, right? Because it's just supposed to be that way. And so showing them that, okay, this is actually an issue that they may be aware of, but differently from our perspective, right? That we didn't grow up the same way you did. But let's lock arms with you, invite them to the table, and let them lead our initiatives on diversity and gender. When it comes to that intersectionality part, I think that's the only way to address it, is all together, with all being diverse, and doing it that way.
And I think, obviously, we all believe in education. And I really, really feel that education is the answer to a lot of our problems that we have. The culture of higher education has got to change. This has not made me real popular over at UTA, but arguments with professors saying, look, in the first accounting class, your goal should not be to weed out 40% of those students so that they never go into the accounting profession because they don't have the minimum skills, math skills or whatever, to be successful. I says, your job is to have more of them be successful, more of them to pass your class. Oh, so you want me to lower my standards? No. I want you to help them be successful. We have the ability to do that. Okay, we have the ability to do it because we have students from all walks of life that are tremendously disadvantaged because of the quality of the education they have when they come in our doors. We have the ability to work with that and to change that because education is the difference maker. It really is. It's the great leveler of society, if you will. And I think that there's got to be a change in the way we view the roles that we have in the world of education. How do we make these students successful? How do we make them successful? How do we make sure that they pass this course so that they can then go on and do the things that we need them to do, that they want to do? And if we can solve that one, then I think we'll solve a lot of the other problems.
Yeah, and you mentioned complexity, and I think that's something that, I talked about people wanting to be seen for their whole self, right? And so it's no longer about, do you fit into this category or that category? It's an intersection of categories for many people. And I think that's one thing as leaders we can do is not make assumptions based on our, experience, but take each person as an individual and talk to them and ask them, what do they want? What do they need? Where do they want to be? Because if you have that intersectionality, really, everybody is truly an individual, right? You do not have, one size fits all. So it has to be approach people where they are as individuals and lead them from that position.
I'm going to bring this home by asking the panelists to, 1 minute final thoughts on maybe something you were itching to get out there that didn't get out there, or just spend a minute and spill, and then we'll complete it. Let's start with you, Dr. Nichols.
Well, that's no fair.
Stage right.
If I had to have a take-home lesson, I asked my daughter. I said, okay, so I told her what I was doing today and that we would likely end up talking about her generation. And I said, so what would you like them to know? She goes, that we're cool. I didn't point out that that was not a word from her generation, probably her grandparents' generation. But I think she encapsulated it. They have a tribal identity. She and I have talked about generation time after time again, and she's the one that brings it up, and they don't like it if I use their language, right? I'm not allowed to use their language. I'm appropriating it, and it's not right. But they are cool, and they don't want to look like the millennials. They want to be themselves, and they want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want to sit at the table. Because again, they are cool.
Thanks, Doctor. Professor?
Mine's not as cool as that. I guess when my dad was a manager for 30 years, a veteran, and then went into management. And one thing he always told me is people are different. People are different. People are different. That was repeated constantly. And usually because I was complaining that my sister got something that I didn't get or that sort of thing. People are different. People need different things at different times. And as I've, gotten older and gotten out into the workforce and then gone into teaching, that's absolutely right. People are different. And if you treat people with respect and you value them for those differences, it makes a huge difference. So I guess that'd be my takeaway.
Thanks, Professor. Dr. Mack.
So I guess mine would be, I want to give you an example. I've talked a little bit about it, this adaptive leadership thing, which is bringing about real change in an operation or in a system. How many of you ever had an MRI? Was it a fun experience? Not at all. Imagine you're a 9-year-old child and you've got to have an MRI. Children are incredibly perceptive, and they know their parents are worried. They know that something's going on. You got this, people in these white uniforms, and they're very stuffy, and it smells bad in there. It's all medicine-y, and you got this big piece of equipment, and it makes weird noises and stuff. So in adaptive leadership, we talk about fixes, okay, technical fixes, and then we talk about adaptive change. So the technical fix, if you've got this kid who's just completely geeked out, and remember they put on the robe and it's open in the back and all that other kind of stuff. They hate this thing. So what's the technical fix for that? You knock them out, okay? You give them a shot and knock them out and stick them in the machine and get your thing done. So some very innovative people in different parts of the United States. They designed a new MRI machine that looks like a pirate ship. And so what happens is the kid gets an email like 3 or 4 days ahead of time, and there's a video there, and it's this whole pirate adventure. And what it is they're stowing away on a pirate ship. And the idea is if the pirates get them, they're going to make them walk the plank and all this other kind of stuff. And kids eat that stuff up. And when they get there, they're greeted by this, nurse, but she's got a pirate hat on and a parrot on her shoulder and all that kind of stuff. Arrgh, and the whole 9 yards. And so the whole adventure is they come in, they get a really cool pair of pajamas that they get to put on instead of that ugly robe. And the whole thing is, the pirates are coming, and they show them the tube there, and that's their hidey hole. And they say, the pirates are coming, get in your hidey hole. Okay, hold real still, the pirates are outside. Procedure's done, come out, the kid's loving it, wants to come back next time. So when you have a few minutes, go ahead and do a search for pirate ship MRI. These things are out there. It's really, really cool looking. And even their parents now are asking to be a part of the pirate adventure when they go for their MRI. That's a perfect example of an adaptive change. Instead of the technical, force the kid by giving them a drug and making them go through. And good luck getting that kid to come back again in that situation. That's an adaptive change where instead of just forcing them to use the system we have, you change the system so that it becomes better. And that's what we all ought to be trying to do, is change that system so that it becomes better instead of just forcing people to use the one that we already have.
Thanks, Dr. Mack. And I hope you all can see now what a blast I've had getting to know these folks and getting the privilege to moderate this panel. You've heard a lot of stuff today, a lot of arrows to put in your quiver, right? Developing a growth and learning mindset as a leader, bringing authenticity, empathy to bear in your role, inclusion with empowerment, building common ground and partnership with this generation, and doing so with innovation and adaptive change. It's been really inspiring for me. I want to thank Mayor Barr for being our microphone runner around the room all today. The man can do everything and has done everything, so thank you very much, Mayor. Thanks for asking me to do this, and to the panel, it's been an honor and privilege to do this with you all. Please give it up for our panelists today.
Thank you all very much. This has been a great panel. I wish we had more time, actually. I'm looking forward now to my next MRI. I'm going to be, and I'm going to reevaluate my sock policy. So, thank you all very, very much for being here. I tell you what, I think we'll take a 5-minute break. The restrooms are out in the foyer and down this corridor here. This is a 5-minute break. I know that means 10, but it's a 5-minute break, and we need to move on with our program. Thank you all very much. I hate to do this to you, but just talk about what you were telling me about working with people in your company.
Sure. So one of the things that I do is every Friday I send out a video. Every Friday, which can be a little taxing. But one of the things that I do is I just talk about what happened that week, the good, the bad, the ugly, and be very transparent. And then secondly, since we're an engineering company, I travel around to all the offices and I take video of our projects with whoever's working on the project, and we walk through it, and and we make jokes, and it's funny. And so I'm sending these videos out, and what's interesting about it is it creates this connection with specifically the younger team members. So when I go visit an office, they walk up and act like they know me, and I've really never had a conversation with them. So that's been a big benefit. The other thing we're doing is we hired an outside consultant to come in and help us with our DEI initiative. And that's been an interesting process. We're right in the middle of it. Don't know exactly where we're gonna land, but that's a combination of going through interviews and focus groups and having some very intense, honest meetings with our staff. And so that's what you and I were talking about. Yeah.
Well, that's just practical application of what the professors were talking about here a while ago. Thanks, Chris. Sorry to ambush you like that, but that's great. all of you need to be aware I might do that again. This morning we had had anticipated Fort Worth Police Chief Neil Noakes would be with us, and the chief is not able to be here today, so he sent a great substitute for him. The guy's really new to the Fort Worth Police Department. He's only been here 19 years, so I think if I introduce him in a second, you'll understand he is a utility player in every sense of the word here in the Fort Worth Police Department. He's done a little bit of everything. From the city's perspective, from the public's perspective, the number one thing the city has to do is to be a safe place. If a city is not safe, it doesn't matter what else is going on. The city is not functioning. So fire and police and those basic things like fire, police, water, sewer, streets, all are critical city functions. But if the city is not a safe place, then the citizens are not going to be happy. They're not going to be successful. Businesses and community, education, whatever we're talking about, is not going to function well if it's not a safe city. So we are very fortunate today to have David Carabajal, who is the commander of the in the police department. He's commander of the Northwest Patrol Division, and I think, what do we have, six?
Yes, sir.
Six
Patrol divisions, north, south, east, west, central, and northwest.
Okay, 6. Let me give you just a little background on the commander. He's currently assigned as commander over the Northwest Patrol Division. As a detective, he spent time in the Property Crimes Unit, the Family Violence Unit, the Sex Crime Unit, as well as the Major Case Unit. Upon promoting to sergeant, he worked in the Gang Unit before transferring to the Narcotics Unit. You get the idea. He's a utility player. He's done it all. He spent several years in narcotics. Then he was promoted to lieutenant, where he was put in command over vice and narcotics section before spending time in the special victims section. Aside from his current duties as a division commander, he is playing a key role as a team member in the city's current violent crime initiative called Fort Worth Safe, and he'll talk to us about that. And he told us, the commander told me a while ago, he likes to have a real interactive discussion, so you all be thinking about things you want to talk about. Commander, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. Thank everyone for having me. Such smart people in the room. What a blessing it is to be here. I was speaking to this young lady earlier, and we were I said, gosh, such smart people here. I'm almost intimidated. Well, kind of am a little bit. And she said, well, if you surround yourself with smart people, that's how you make yourself better. Well, then today, mission accomplished for me, because there are definitely some great people here. Some of the things we're facing here in Fort Worth is not unlike what you guys are facing out in the business world. Because when they first gave me this project, they said, talk about state of crime in the city. And I'm like, what do these people want to hear about the state of crime in the city? This is about learning and talking about new things and being innovative. I said, I'm not going to talk about the state of crime. I'm going to talk about where we want to be with crime, because that's what this room's about, where we want to be. One of the things we're doing with that is this initiative called Fort Worth Safe. When we first started it, the chief talked to everyone. He says, hey, I need ideas on how to stop crime. How do we fight crime? And I'm an up-and-comer, so I'm like, okay, I'll give my idea. I've had some experience. Well, he went ahead and took my idea, and he says, Dave, I want you to go ahead and lead the operations side as well. So I was like, gosh, maybe I should have kept my mouth shut. But no, it's been great. We're facing record staffing shortages, just like everybody is, with COVID. And then also, not a lot of people want to be officers anymore. Breaks my heart, but I understand there's reasons why. So we do have a lot of hard time filling our staffing, so we're having to do more with less. So when I was sitting down talking to the chief, he starts talking about partners. Who are we going to partner with? How are we going to get better? More partners, more partners. And I said, Chief, the biggest partner we have to work with to be better is ourselves, because the cavalry's not coming. What we have is what we have. We're not going to get any more staffing, so we just have to work with the community and ourselves if we're going to get any better. So if you don't mind, I'm going to run through this, our plan real quick. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, interrupt me. It won't be an interruption at all. Overview. Again, this is going to be an all-hands-deck approach to this operation. as with many police departments, like we talked about, we're short-staffed. The only way we're going to get better is to be work smarter and more efficiently. The other thing we're using is a lot of intelligence and a lot of technology. It's not the old days anymore. We can't just go out and stop every car. You can't see an area and say, this is an area with crime, so I'm going to stop 100 cars to get that one guy. It's not acceptable anymore. We talked about people feeling safe. Everybody deserves to feel safe, but everybody deserves to feel respected too. Just because if you live in an area with lots of violent crime doesn't mean you need to have police contact. Why should you be contacted by us if you're doing everything right? It's that 1% causing the problem, so why should you have that police contact? So we're having to be smarter using technology and intelligence. Again, a large majority of our aggravated assaults are committed by a small number of people. To target those, we're having a real robust intelligence program. Then we're handing over those names to our tactical intelligence teams whose goal is to focus on these guys directly. We're not focusing on everybody, we're focusing on just those guys. These teams are comprised of a narcotics unit, a DR unit, which is basically a tactical unit. They can do warrants and things like that, as well as a narcotics dog, because what you're having is, just like in the business world, the main thing what your people want is the resources they need when they need it. If they want to accomplish a task, they don't want to put in an order and it take forever to get to it. They want it to happen now. So what we did is we embedded the narcotics teams with the tactical teams, so they're basically a rolling force. If they see a problem, they can deal with it in real time. Again, our focus is in small designated PRAs. It's odd, I don't have the numbers on me, but there's about, I'd say about 5% of the city has probably 40% of the violent crime. And that's mind-boggling. So when we have these extra resources, we don't need to deploy them everywhere. We need to go to those small places where they're happening, but then again, in a very smart way. We can't just go in there and start tearing things up and stopping everyone, because we're making as many enemies as we're making friends. You can turn a whole community against you. If you live in a particular area and there's police, in some places, in some neighborhoods, the police come by, they wave at you with all their fingers, and and there's some where they're not, but there's reason behind that. If your only interaction with police is when they're working murders, is when they're working shootings, is when you're stopping them, when you're giving them a ticket, when they don't have enough money to make their water bill, they're not going to be happy to see you. So we have to have those positive interactions as well. But we go into those small areas with the most problems, but we're very smart about our approach. Again, gone are the days of over-policing. It's not happening. Chief Noakes doesn't allow it, and that's not the culture that we're having in this police department. Gang will continue to target the most violent members in our city. They're a big part of our initiative. We're using them, but we also took 2 other teams that had other missions, and we pushed them over into the gang unit to work with them at the nighttime hours to, again, targeting those gang offenders that are causing the most problems, not everyone. Vice will focus the majority of its time on illegal game rooms. Have any of y'all seen the illegal game rooms around the city? You know what those are? It's terrible. They set up these Vegas-style games, and they put them in convenience stores, and they put them in buildings, and there'll be like 30, 40, 50 of them, and they're turning massive profit. And it's a congregation for criminals. It's like, it's criminal Vegas. You can go there at 7 in the morning, and they're still there on the machines. I'm talking about in Fort Worth. We're not talking about Detroit. We're not talking about Chicago. I'm talking about in Fort Worth. You can go out at 7 in the morning, and there's people on these game rooms, but it's also, they deny access to anyone except for the criminals. Or they have to know you. There's a vetting process to get in. So it's a lot harder for us to go in there and infiltrate. I worked a lot with those when I was working in the Vice unit. But it becomes a place, it's a sub-economy there, because you can deal in drugs, you can deal in stolen property, you can deal in just about anything, because you walk in there, it's closed doors, no one else is allowed but private members. Yes, sir.
So, help me understand exactly again. So, there's a convenience store
Yes.
that I can walk to outside my community. I literally can walk there with my home. And I go in there occasionally to get gas. It's a little, we jokingly call it the stop and drop.
Yes, sir.
It's a little weird store. And so I stop there to get gas. And when I go in, there's a wall out. Not a big wall, but a kind of like the boardroom walls of, the little places we work in. And I looked around the corner there, and they have what appears to me to be, I don't know, slot machine looking devices. And it's been there for years. I've seen it for 15 years.
They operate under they're only allowed to give a prize up to, I believe, $5 or a prize worth $5. So we call it the stuffed animal effect. They're supposed to be giving out stuffed animals, but they're paying out actual money, which is not right. So, and a lot of the problem with that is not, we're doing what we can, but we're going to need tough laws to put into place to where we can go in there and enforce them. And they're all over now. And the problem with it is, a lot of places don't have those in the neighborhood. Some do. Some have the smaller ones, like you talked about, and some have the big ones. And it's kind of like the broken windows theory. If you're allowing open illegal activity to happen in your neighborhood, why not? Why not break into a car? Why not shoot off some rounds in the air? So the more we allow in the little things is the more that other people feel it's okay to commit crimes. So we are focusing on that, and they're very profitable for the risk versus reward. For what you may go to jail for, we used to go into these when I was a vice sergeant, and we would easily see sometimes $40,000, $50,000 in the middle of the day, and that was half their day's till. And that's cash business. They're not reporting to the IRS, I promise you. So it's definitely a problem, and we are looking at it. Any more questions on game rooms before I move on?
In some places they try to say, well, you don't have more than 5, it's okay. And they have those right out in the open.
There's different regulations for more than 5 and less than 5. If there's less than 5, then it falls under the county ordinance. If it's more, then it falls under state laws. But they're doing everything they can to get around this because it's extremely profitable. Those machines make more than the convenience store. Promise. Yeah, and it's all tax-free. They're just taking that cash and putting it in their pocket. So it's a problem that we're working on. Family violence. Traditionally, family violence hasn't been a big part of our violent crime program. However, family violence offenses are a big driver for aggravated assaults in our city. We would go to meetings and we'd say, okay, we had 10 assaults in Northwest Division, and 8 of those were family violence. So we don't got to talk about those because we can't stop them. Let's talk about the 2 that we can stop. So we're trying to change that as much as we can. It's hard from the police department standpoint. That's a social worker problem. It's it's problems that happen behind closed doors. How do you solve that as a police officer? It's tough. So we're doing what we can. What we're trying to do is finding places where family violence is occurring the most. And so we did it. We had never done it before, and they said, let's just track family violence with the dots on the map. Surprisingly, or not, depending on your opinion, the most family violence in the city was occurring in multifamily housing in underserved areas of the community. So good and bad, obviously it's bad, but it's also a place that we can focus on. So what we're trying to do is when we get these family violence warrants, we're trying to give them the highest priority and get those served almost immediately. And it's in the spirit of deterrence. It's basically, if you assault your wife, your husband, your child today, we're going to be at your door in about a day or 2 to pick you up. So it's not going to go at the bottom of the stack. We're taking it to the top of the stack. So that's from the law enforcement side. We also have to look at it from the other side as well, from the education side. So we're targeting these areas where there's the most family violence, and we're going out and knocking on doors. We're going to hand out flyers. This is ways to get help. This doesn't have to happen to you. Here's numbers. Here's addresses where you can go and get the assistance that you need. And we're targeting the areas where it's happening the most. And that was talking about the prevention, identifying those hot spots and giving them the assistance they need. So we're approaching it from law and order as well as assistance. Again, talking about multifamily housing, a lot of times we have these multifamily housing apartment complexes that have so much crime. And it's terrible because people have to live there. And again, it's that 5%, 1% causing all the problems, but they're unfortunately have to see that every single day. So we're trying to focus on them as well. When there's a lot of crime occurring there, we're trying to address it, but at the same time, we want to look at it from the other side as well. Our neighborhood police officers, their job is community support. That's basically what they do. They don't do a lot of arresting. They do a lot of community outreach. So we made a new call sign, and I know this is a small fix, but we made a new call sign called a 65A. It's basically a business check in an apartment complex. But what we want to do is where we're having the most crime, my team, I work in operations. Where we have the most crime, I'm going to go out there and enforce. We're going to go out there and do what we have to do to put the bad guys in jail. But the problem is the only time they're seeing us in this apartment complex is whenever me and my guys are out there or if someone's being hurt. So what's their view of police? Probably not very good. Even though we may not be the ones causing the problem, they associate us with the problem because the only time we're there is when negative things are happening. So we created this call sign. What we want our MPOs to do is if we have the map and there's a bunch of places where there's offense in that area, I'm not only going to enforce, but they're going to go out there and take these calls and go out there and just shake a hand, hand out a flyer, set up a table, start a conversation, have a community meeting, and then document those. And it's a way of reporting through accountability, because when I go out there and we talk about the crime every week, we're going to say, okay, where's our crime at? Here it is. Commander Carabajal, what did you guys do to enforce it? Say, this is what we did. We arrested these guys, that guys, whatever. And then we're going to say, MPOs, what did you do to outreach in that same community? We want all the dots to line up. We want everyone to be in the same place, where not just enforcement, but also outreach. Again, working with our federal partners, we're working actively with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The idea for that is to get maximum sentencing for those that need it the most. Again, not just your car burglar, but the one that's been out there multiple times. He's been in multiple offense. He's assaulted many people, and he just keeps going in and out of the state system. We've been working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they said, you know what, bring us that guy, and we're going to go ahead and make sure he gets the sentencing he deserves to take him out of the community so he stops hurting people. Community support. Again, the department cannot defeat this violent crime issue without the community support. We talk about, partners and ways of getting better. We're not getting any more officers. We can only partner with each other more and partner with the community more. The more outreach we do, the more eyes and ears we have, and it's free. And you'd be surprised how many community members want to go out there and help us. They want to go out there and report, but they just want to feel like we're going to do something with it. They don't want to tell me about a problem, and then I just say, okay, thank you very much, and walk away and nothing happens. They want to see the results. And we owe that to them, but at the same time, they become our force multipliers. So how are things going? In the last 7 days, we made 32 felony arrests, 17 misdemeanor arrests, seized 46 guns, and cleared 34 warrants. Now, what I want you to focus on is that 46 guns seized. So people accuse me of being anti-gun, which I'm not. I have a lot of guns. But that's not taking 46 guns from people that are out there doing the right things for the right reasons. That's taking 46 guns from gang members and people that are hurting folks. I would dare to say of those 46, probably at least 35 would have been in the direct hands of gang members. They're going to go out there and use those for bad things. That's making an impact. These guys are out there doing it every day and working hard every night. So I certainly applaud the results. And we're going to keep this going every week. This isn't a one-time thing. We're going to be out there until we get this crime to come down. Some of the successes. These are some of the photos from the last 7 days. Again, we're not talking about Chicago. We're not talking about Houston. We're not even talking about Dallas. This is in y'all's city where y'all live. This is the stuff we're taking off the streets every night. This is only from the last 10 days. And there's a lot more photos. I was only able to grab a few. But these assault rifles and that little drum right there, that holds, gosh, it's got to hold at least 60, 80 rounds. You can drop that right into your machine gun and just go to town. Again, more weapons. Our gang unit's been doing a great job. There's no law-abiding purpose for that gun to be used. We took it off a very bad person. And what you got to think about is he didn't just willingly give it to us. You had to have an officer go out there and find a way to get that very safely. They don't just hand these to us, say, hey, excuse me, sir, I'd like to give you all my guns. It don't happen that way. So granted, they love what they do. They get paid well for what they do, but they are doing a darn good job, and we appreciate them. Again, more drugs and money. I think he's got a little card there praying to the god of drug dealers. It's a cash business, lots of money. You know what? You'd be surprised by the biggest driver of some of our violent crime is marijuana sales. Because marijuana sales is a cash business. And, it's not I don't have a stance for or against. That's not my position. But for the amount, it used to be all your violent crime was around methamphetamine, cocaine, all those things. But when you think about it, how many people do you know that do cocaine or methamphetamine? Probably not very many. But you may have come across someone that smokes marijuana. It comes from somewhere. And it's a cash business, so it's dealing in lots of volume. And anyone can do it. All you got to do is order it up on FedEx, have it delivered. You can start it with about $3,000 and you're a business and you're rolling. But a lot of times what these guys see, because you have amateur drug dealers, what I call them, they moonlight. They're like, I'm going to be a drug dealer. I'm going to sell marijuana, so they're the sheep. But then you have the wolves who see that because they love it, because they'll advertise on social. Yes, sir.
What's the solution in the mind of the police department as it relates specifically to marijuana? Many states are legalizing it, of course. I doubt that would happen in Texas. We're fairly conservative states, so I would think Texas will probably near the end of the line. But in the mind of the police department, what's the solution to the marijuana issue?
Well, I'll start with the generic answer, and then I'll dive in a little bit more. All we can do is enforce the laws that are in place. That's all we can do. We can't legislate from the police car. But also some people say, well, if you legalize it, it's going to go away because you have that sub-economy that's not going to be there anymore. But then you think about it, if you have these criminals, they're choosing to do this right now. So if you take that away, I don't think they're going to pack their bags up and stop being criminals. They're going to do something else. So there's no easy solution. We could make it legal today, and it would slow them down for a second. They'd have to say, how am I going to make some money now? Because it was so easy to rob these amateur drug dealers. What do I got to do? I guess I better get a job. No, they're gonna find a way. So it's more of a holistic social problem than it is a marijuana problem. That's just my opinion, and like I said, I'm not allowed to have an opinion either way. I'm just allowed to enforce the laws unbiasedly. But although if we were to legalize it tomorrow, the criminal activity around it would not disappear. But I'm getting here towards the end. But I'd love to have some questions. Such great minds. I'd love to learn from you guys.
I was just wondering, you said there's a lack of police officers. So are we mostly reactive right now versus proactive when it comes to crime? And like we're addressing apartments or high crime areas, but crime also eventually moves, right? So how does that get handled?
Absolutely. I like that question. Thank you very much. Because you just talked about a problem that you guys were talking about in this room in general, motivating people. A police officer gets paid the same if he arrests 10 people today or if he arrests one, just like you guys were talking about in business. How do you motivate these millennials? I was listening, talking about that. I was enjoying that conversation because we have millennials and police officers as well too. And the millennials and the Gen Z, they just want to do their job and go home. I'm sorry, because at all professionals, the younger people, they value personal life more than they value professional. It was us back in the day. I'm going to work till, we still do. I'm going to work till 10 o'clock at night to make sure it happens. I'm going to try and put a plan together. We're going to fix this problem. And the young people are like, you know what? I'm going to work the exact hours I got to work. And afterwards, I'm going to go home and enjoy my family, which is not a terrible idea. We'd probably have less police divorces if I would listen to that. So maybe they're onto something. But to answer your question, it's all about motivating them. Some are reactive because they're human beings. We don't get these men and women from Mars. We get them from Fort Worth, right around here. And so it's our job as leaders to motivate them. And so that's what we're doing, and we're seeing it better. And it's not just that we're dealing in apartment complexes or places where it's occurring, but when you have limited resources, as in your business, that's where we put the most of them at. And like I said, it's just making a balance to try and solve a problem because everyone deserves to feel safe. No matter where you live. It's just a lot easier to do that in some places than others. Any questions, please? Yes, sir.
Little 57. What, if you have the liberty to share, what are the plans, if there are any, for the police department in regards to the upcoming trial?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. What we're going to do with the trial is we're going to respect the legal system. It's just whatever the legal system does, that's what we're going to support. But we're also going to respect people's rights to have a voice, respect people's right to have an opinion, respect people's right to protest peacefully. If everyone's going to do it peacefully, we want people to have their voice. We want them to get out and have their First Amendment rights. I'm sure my kids, will probably be doing the same thing. So we respect it. We want to do it. We just want it peaceful. We want to make sure that the city's safe, that the businesses are safe, and beyond that, we're just going to respect the decision. Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak to the use of body cams?
Yes, I can. It's at first when we started, like when I first started, we didn't have them. All we had, there was a VHS tape in the back that was usually not in place, and sometimes you come in to check because you were supposed to check for the VHS tape, but you wouldn't. But sometimes you would check, and they'd have like a Shrek movie, and they're like somebody was watching Shrek on their video system instead of using it for what it was supposed to. But it's gotten a lot better, and there's very strict policies in place within the department, and there's very strict policies required by the state of Texas. We have to have it. It's the law, and it's good. And officers, old guys like me initially, there was not, we didn't embrace it in the beginning, but as it went on, it helped as much for us as it did for the citizens. Many different ways. People act differently when they're on camera. I don't care who you are. If a camera followed you around every day for your entire workday, you might act a little bit different, or you might get used to it after a while. But so it's good for that. It promotes good behavior. But at the same time, when officers are accused of misconduct, it also clears them. And they started seeing that. They started seeing that it's not just, I don't know how many complaints are cleared because of the body camera. But at the same time, it's also good for the citizens because stuff that officers used to be able to get away with, they are not able to. So it works good for everybody. The young folks have embraced it because they've never known a life without it. These young officers that come on today have never known when you didn't have it. So right from the very beginning, they're used to it. They're living their lives on camera every day. So it's a tall order. I got a lot of respect for them. But that's pretty much my opinion on body cameras.
So is it 100% usage if you're?
Yes, ma'am. If you're out on the streets taking enforcement action, you will wear a body camera and you will have it on. And it used to be up here, and now it's a little box right here in the front. So if you ever see an officer reaching for this, that's what he's touching. And they have to, it's a policy. As a commander, I've had to often give officers discipline for not wearing your body camera. And I hate to do it, but I'm trying to tell them that I'm trying to make sure you get through your whole career. So I have to correct you now so you don't get in trouble later. Because what if something happens, you don't have that camera on? It's going to be implied that there was a reason why you turned it off. So we catch them when they're doing it on small things, and a lot of times it's by accident, so we don't have the problem down the road. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
You've discussed staff shortages. How are those being addressed? Because you can't just not hire police officers. So what kind of recruitment efforts are you doing, and are you trying to recruit a diverse force?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Yes, on several points. As far as a diverse force, we're definitely working on that. We've had our first, I guess, the last academy class, or the one before, was the first majority minority class. So it was basically the minorities were in the majority. So we're doing a great job. We have our program called Be the Change, where we're targeting minorities, but good minorities. And it's not, because I worked in backgrounds for a very short time too. And so sometimes we would have a hard time finding diverse candidates. And I was thinking, we're going in the wrong places. We have to specifically target great ones, because there's amazing diverse candidates in colleges and universities. A lot of them just don't want to deal with us. They don't want to become police officers. So it's part of the recruitment is just changing their mind on letting them know, hey, we're the good guys. We're trying to do good things, but part of that's just a reputation of working on that every day. So we do get those good, solid, diverse candidates. And as far as the staffing, yes, we're definitely working on it. It's getting better, but it's going to take a while, because to hire a police officer, it takes about from the day he fills out the application till the day he is actually out on the streets by himself, probably about 2 years. So the problem we're dealing with today, we're planting seeds that are going to hatch in 2 years. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I think it's Dallas that has like a $100 or to $500 limit on if you steal something from a convenience store, then they're not going to pursue it. And I could kind of understand how that would be something you would consider if you have not enough staff, because you don't want to send a lot of people. But then by advertising it, it seems like that would be just like the video games. But I just kind of wanted to know what your thoughts were on just those kind of ideas.
Absolutely. I'm going to fall back on my response earlier from the marijuana. We enforce the laws that are in place. And I believe if you steal, then if it's against the law, then we're going to enforce it. And it's sometimes going to make for a longer day for us. It's sometimes going to be, we're going to have to multitask and make things happen, but you guys do that every day. So if there's a law in place, I'm glad that we're enforcing it. Now, we only play by the rules in the book. Now, if we ever have a DA or a lawmaker say that's no longer illegal, fine. Just tell me the rules and we'll play by them. But for now, in Fort Worth, that's illegal, so we're going to enforce it.
Just had a question back to game rooms. That's a problem all over Texas. Yep. Is there a model ordinance or something that the city is looking at that is going to come before council to try to give you more tools to enforce that easier? Because it's a tough one, as I know. Yeah.
Yes, sir. It certainly is a tough one. We do have rules. We do have ordinances in place. They also have a powerful litigation team on their end. They definitely, it's in their best interest to stay in business because they want to keep generating revenue. And part of us is just initiatives like this. You know, we want to go out there and enforce and build back up. And so you have to deal with your resources. If you have resources and you have people getting killed and shot, and then you have people gambling. So it's kind of like, where am I going to put those limited resources? So for now, we're putting some there, and then we're putting a lot of them towards the most violent crime, although that is important in a driver, no doubt. So it's just like in all of y'all's businesses, it's like, where do I put my limited, precious resources? And so we're definitely working on them. And that's a big push for me because I used to work in Vice, and we would deal with these every day. And I felt like it was making an impact. I felt like it was making a difference because I hate to see this going on in somebody's neighborhood that has to live next to it. I wouldn't want it in my neighborhood, so they shouldn't have it in their neighborhood. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, sure.
You're being instructed to use the microphone, sir.
Much like the police, we're going to live within the laws we've been given. Much has been made of bad guys in the police, and the George Floyd trial and all that entails certainly brought that to the forefront, so now it's debated in every community. As someone on the inside that has been across many departments in the last of your career, just in your mind, we all have whispers at our own work. We all know who the bad guys are that we work with, right? Most people do. So what percentage of the police department, as someone on the inside, probably is not serving the community in the way that they should actually be a police person, just in terms of your travels?
Yeah, absolutely. And the best way to answer that is we are human beings. And we could say in the business world, how many people in the business world are probably not very nice people and doing bad things? Hard to put your finger on, but it's going to be the same or similar with officers. The unfortunate part is we can do a lot more damage. A bad guy in my job can do a lot more damage than a bad guy in one of y'all's jobs, maybe, just an assumption. So it's really hard to put a handle on it, but I will say it's not, the culture is not there anymore. The culture when I started 19 years ago is night and day. It's just not the same. It's not accepted. It's not accepted by peers. You would see very little reporting officer on officer before. You just didn't do it. Again, we're talking, 19, 20 years ago. Now it's just, they're not, first of all, it's not right. Second of all, they're not going to risk their career for someone else's dumb decision. And on top of that, there's cameras everywhere. So I really think it's so much better. And whatever percentage it was, the percentage is much, much smaller now, and we work to get rid of it every day. If I could, because if I were able to make that assessment and say, well, I know there's about 2%, then I have failed, because then I know about that and I haven't fixed it. So I should say it's 0%, because if I knew about the 1%, I'm going to take care of it today. Yes, ma'am. Basically, a turnover rate based on officers that are fired for misconduct. Yeah. I don't have that, but it's something that can be pulled. It's not the department that I do work in. I would suspect it's a very small number, because when it happens, it reverberates through the department. It's on the news. Generally, if an officer is fired, you're going to see us on NBC5 probably. And that's another motivator. It's like, I don't want to do bad, but I don't want to be on the news either. But it's very low. It really is very low. But I will say, as far as discipline, that happens all the time, because I want to give them small discipline and they don't like it, but I have to discipline them because I tell them I want to see you have that 19-year career. I want to see you have that 20-year career. I want to see you have a 30-year career. So I got to correct you now. And that's the culture that we have. And like I said, I think they'll understand as time goes on, but we are making the corrections every day to make sure we have a police force that's acting the way they're supposed to. It's not what you preach, it's what you allow. And I could say all day, I come out here and say, I'm not going to allow all these things to happen. But then when an officer gets in trouble, it'll be fine. Then I'm not doing what I need to be doing. But I promise you, we are having those conversations. Yes, ma'am.
Entry-level pay for police officer today?
I want to say, gosh, I want to say it's in the 60,000 range. I was a good guesser. Thank you. I got close. So yeah, it's about 60. But certainly it's and they appreciate it. It gets better from there. And I've always, people say, thank you for what you're doing. I know it's hard. You guys deserve more. I'm like, no, thank you. I love my job. I love what I do. I think I'm paid fair. If you could pay me twice as much, I wouldn't take the job somewhere else. Funny thing, when I first started, I applied for this department, and I applied because I saw an ad in the paper. Yes, the paper, not the internet. And so I'm like, I was working in the airline industry, and it wasn't working out. So I'm going to give this a shot, maybe. And then so they said, come on down, take the test. I'm like, all right. So I took the test. It was fine. And they said, well, come on back and take the physical. I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do this. Maybe. So I went down there, and I took the physical. And then I went to the background process, and they said, okay, well, you have to do a ride-along before we allow you to be permitted to move forward in the process. I said, all right, not sure if I want to do this. So I took a ride-along with an officer and rode with him for 8 hours, and I've never wanted to do anything else in my life. Because it's a different perspective you get, and it's hard to express, just like whatever y'all's own experiences. But yes, I love my job, we love our job, and we're grateful for it. Yes, sir.
And I don't know. Thank you for being here today. I don't know if you're aware of the project that Chief Noakes is working on with Operation Progress with some of the schools to kind of help change the kind of the mentality of the police force with our young people, and do kind of an active partnership where the students get to know officers from the department and see the police as the good guys instead of somehow how they're portrayed in media, et cetera. And so I was just curious if you knew anything about that, if you could speak to that, Operation Progress.
Sure. I am not involved with that. Again, I'm used as a different tool right now, but I love the sound of that because I'm also over in the Northwest Division, and one of the problems that we're having is I have 14, 15, 16-year-olds that are literally killing each other. That's not exaggerating. I'm not saying like, they're being bad. No, they're killing each other. And it's a terrible war that we're having. And the problem is we're losing the war that you're talking about. Because they have these youngsters, and they're literally like 14 years old, and they have guns like we showed. They have money, and it's not a lot of money. It may be like $500, $600. So they're on social media, and they're posting it up to their buddies saying, hey, look at me. And they're the cool guys now. Or if they're not the cool guys, they're at least the interesting guys. And their membership is growing exponentially, but we need to contradict that with things like what you're talking about, because we're losing the PR campaign, which maybe some of you guys here can understand. They're beating the brakes off us in the PR campaign because the social media, they're saying how cool they are, and they're committing all these crimes. But when you're 14 and you have nothing, and I think someone earlier was talking here about some of the poverty, but these kids have nothing. And when you have nothing, and then you have this guy who you go to school with, and he's posting up with guns and money, and he may be kind of popular, he may have a girlfriend, and then that's the voice, that's the strong thing in your life. Where are you going to go? And it's a problem for sure. So I appreciate that, and I'm going to get with Chief Noakes next week when he gets back from out of town, because I want to target some of the schools in my area as well. Any more questions?
Operation Progress started in Los Angeles several years back, and Chief Noakes wanted to bring it here to Fort Worth, so it's been kind of interesting.
Well, thank you for bringing that to me. All right. If that's it, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to do one more segment, and then we'll have lunch, and lunch will be here in this room. Actually, they're wheeling it in the door back there right now. Very pleased today that we have a special guest, and that's Christina Brooks. I first met Christina at actually a LeaderPrime group meeting a couple of years, a year and a half or so ago. And I left that meeting thinking, this is somebody that really knows what she's talking about. She is a results-driven equity, diversity, access, and inclusion professional with about 20 years of experience working with underrepresented populations. She's been in Fort Worth about 2 years? Third year, okay. And she is the city's Chief Equity Officer. And prior to coming to Fort Worth, she served in the City of South Bend Mayor's Office as the first Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the city under Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And in South Bend, she led the workforce, workplace, community diversity, purchasing and contracting, and small local MWBE policy development. She's having an impact here in Fort Worth, and I'm very pleased that she could be with us today. Christina, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good to see you. Well, good afternoon. It looks like I am standing in between you and lunch. So that's always an interesting place to be. But I appreciate you inviting me to speak with all of you this afternoon about a really important topic, and that is diversity, equity, inclusion. And in our department with the City of Fort Worth, we also add another acronym, which is access. And so I'll give you a little bit of background information just on kind of what our department does and how it came to be. So it's my understanding that, are you all new to Fort Worth? Or are you, okay, some of you are new to Fort Worth. So what you may know if you've been here for at least the last 7 years or so is that my position in our department was actually the result of the Fort Worth community getting together and after a pretty public, nationally public event that took place here in Fort Worth between a mom protecting her child and a police officer trying to protect the community. And that traumatic event didn't end well. And because of that, the community said, we've got to do something to change Fort Worth. They got together, a group of 22 individuals, 4 co-chairs, and developed 7 key areas to focus on: criminal justice, economic development, education, governance, health, housing, and transportation. My specific role and department were 2 of the recommendations out of the 22 across those 7 areas in governance. And I came on staff here with the City of Fort Worth in December of 2019, right before COVID hit, a few months later. But in the process of, even though we have a national, international pandemic going on, the work of our department has continued. And so our department right now is comprised of 3 distinct divisions. We have the Civil Rights Enforcement Division, which is continuing the work of the Human Relations Commission. We are the equivalent of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and the EEOC in investigating complaints in fair housing, fair employment, public accommodations, ADA, and Title VI programs here in Fort Worth. The next division is our Business Equity Division. It used to be housed in our Economic Development Department. It came over to our department shortly after my arrival, and we changed the focus of our Business Equity Division, which still manages and oversees the city's ordinance on business diversity, looking at contracts over $100,000, making sure that city funds are spent in a fiscally responsible way, but also an inclusive way, making sure that vendors who are led by African American, Hispanic, Asian, Native, Indigenous, and women-owned businesses get their fair chance at city contracting dollars. So they still do that, but now the role is a little bit different, where they actually are partnering with project managers within the city to make sure that language in bids that are advertised do not present any unnecessary barriers for participation from any small business or organization, specifically here in our marketplace in Fort Worth, but from around the world. And so that's our business equity division. The newest division, which did not exist in any form or fashion in our department, is the municipal equity division. And that division is the one that kind of tracks on the progress of those 22 recommendations in those 7 different areas. We work closely with our Human Relations Commission, who is right now actually reviewing those recommendations and making updates to those recommendations to ensure that we're measuring the right things. And I'm going to get into why that is important, especially when you're talking about equity work, that we're measuring progress and we're measuring the right things. Additionally, our municipal equity division is also responsible for the city's municipal equity plan. And so we are looking at municipal equity and municipal service delivery across all 20 plus departments in the city and the services that we provide, but in the context of the resources that we allocate across the city. We look at our capital investments in the city and infrastructure projects. So we want to make sure that we are not only closing any gaps, any disparity gaps that currently exist in the city, but we also want to make sure that we are not creating new ones. So that in 20 years, whoever is in leadership here with the city of Fort Worth, maybe somebody in this room right now, but that you don't have to solve problems that were created by policy decisions that we're making today. And so that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell right now, but I want to kind of get into equity work and understanding how you can play an integral part in making sure that your organizations are positioned to continue to be leaders in whatever industry you're in, and being leaders here in Fort Worth, and why that's important. Why that's important. So before I get on my little soapbox here, I want to ask you, why would you think that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important in the space that you're in? Why is that? Or if you don't feel like it is, say, you know, like I really don't think that this is a discussion that we need to be having in 2022. Ah. Mm.
So we have the position allocated, but have chosen not to hire until we find someone that truly understands the action required versus the photo or website.
That is key. And I'm really glad to hear that you're taking your time and being intentional about who you hire. I can tell you some really horror stories. As you know, in the last couple of years, right after the George Floyd incident, overnight, literally overnight, we saw this blossoming of equity experts who were offering their consulting services. Right? Literally overnight, just all these organizations popping up and saying, I can come in and help your company design an equity program, and you know, you're looking at your HR functions and making sure that you have an equitable workforce. And unfortunately, some of these people I actually knew, right? Knew what they were doing before they started down this opportunity, and unfortunately I can tell you, like, I would not hire them. Like they have no idea. So when you are, as a leader, thinking about implementing a program or a department or a unit that's focused and intentional about equity work, it is critical that you hire someone who has a track record of doing this work. They didn't just pop up on LinkedIn the day after George Floyd with a company. That they have, that you can speak to organizations or individuals that they've worked with or worked for and find out, like, what exactly did they do? Because one of the things that's really important to me is understanding motivation behind why people want to get into this space. And this goes across race, gender, age, socioeconomic status. And I say this because I've been doing this for a long time. And I know this to be true. If the person who is in this work is doing it for revenge, don't hire them. Don't hire them, because they will end up doing more damage to your organization than they could ever do to help. You have to come into this work with a clean heart, with the intent to make sure that the organization and the individuals that you work with are better for you having been there. If you're coming in because you have some unhealed trauma and you want to make sure that people pay, that is the wrong position to be in to do this work. It's the wrong position to be in. And so sometimes that's difficult to assess when you're in a leadership position and you're charged with making inroads in equity work. And so that's why I'm saying make sure that you connect with people that have been doing this a long time and actually have some results to show for what they've done and what they've implemented in organizations and in communities. And if they don't have that track record, I'm not saying that they couldn't be, just beginning or emerging in that space, and that's fine, but typically when you're talking about organizations like the ones that are represented in this room, you really don't want to be the guinea pig, right, for somebody just starting out in this work. You want to have somebody who has a level of expertise and understanding and can call in reinforcements from other practitioners, not just in your area, but from around the country and sometimes around the world who have been doing this work a long time. And so it's really important, and I'm glad that you said that your company is looking to start this, but you're taking your time in order to identify someone who can actually come in and make the kinds of changes and the progress that the organization is actually seeking. The second, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that you need the microphone.
Oh.
You were asking the question, why do we do this work, or why should we? It came up actually as a question on our staff, our team at T3. We have a DEI committee, we have a wellness committee, and we bring individuals in to support us on those initiatives. And the question was, our mission is all about equity, and our staff is diverse. So why do we need a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee? And so my response was, because we need to understand the individuals that we're serving, and the best way that we can do that is to get as close as possible to what their journey might have looked like. So we all have blinders that we come into these positions with, and we have students who, for whatever reason, they do not see their elementary education or their schools that their students are attending as a place where they feel heard and they feel valued. Well, why is that? So being a headmaster of one of those types of schools, I know why, because I've asked parents, I've talked to them, and I've lived that. But some of our team members have never experienced that and don't understand. So how can we develop and create and design programs if we don't have that understanding? Right. So shifting DEI from just a program or initiative, but an integral part of your business strategy, because it brings together diverse voices, opinions, all of that gives you an advantage.
Oh my gosh, those were amazing comments, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I'm going to tell you why I'm going to focus on a portion of what you said, that there is this notion that if your organization is visually diverse, by that I mean you have racial representation, maybe there's a high gender equilibrium in gender representation, and then, you know, the default is, well, we don't need anybody to kind of live. We kind of already know, and I'm telling you, that is not the case, right? Just because you may feel like you have racial or gender representation in your organization, it doesn't mean that they understand the context and the full 360-degree views that are expressed. They may know full well what their personal experience has been in that context of that portion of their identity. But only a seasoned practitioner in equity work has put in the time and the energy and the study and the research and the practicum to understand what that should look like for more than just your own individual identity. When you begin thinking about policy and processes in the context of what that looks like for everyone, including the white population in your organization, right? We have, over the past 20 years or so that I've been doing this work, one of the things that I've noticed, and it's one of the reasons why I made the statement before about what motivates people to do this work is so important, is because if you're coming into a space and you're only looking at it from your own personal context, you're missing out. And if you are doing it for revenge purposes, most of the time, some of the most damage is done when you have equity conversations and you exclude white people, right? That's a race as well, right? When they are not at the table, when you are having conversations about what it means to be inclusive, you are missing the whole point of inclusion. If you're only including people with a significant level of melanin in their skin, or if you are only including women in conversations, that's not equity, that's not inclusion.
I really appreciate the conversation because it's awesome. It kind of ties back to what we were the panelists were talking about before, you know, this whole notion of empathy and understanding. It becomes more of a conversation around relationship. I work at the Tarrant Area Food Bank, and we are now doing a lot of training on trauma informed, right? Because we're dealing with people who have trauma. And so learning to understand the perspective of somebody presenting with trauma, so that we can serve them better. And then the other thought that goes through my head, I mean, for years in the marketing space, if you P&L business, you studied the people who bought your product to understand about them, right? So you could relate and make a product that they wanted. And that's like very elementary, but what we're really talking about here is relationship. And in order to have the relationship, I need to understand you at your individual level. And it also ties a lot back to the conversation about the Gen Z and what's forthcoming.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear that you brought up trauma-informed community models, because I literally just had a conversation earlier this week with our police department. I was happy to see that our Fort Worth Police Department was represented. But as we are developing the Fort Worth Police Department strategy, that's part of the work that I do is help our departments that are developing strategy, 5-year strategic plans, incorporate and infuse equity, not as a peripheral activity, something that you do out after you finish doing all the main work, and then you just come over here and, you know, throw a little, we're going to hire diverse people on the side. That's not how it should work, right? Equity should be woven into the fabric of the way that your organization does business. And you do that because at a very rudimentary level, at the bottom line, your organization is going to be fiscally more in a better position if you include and make sure that you are incorporating inclusive policies than if you don't. Right? How many of you can remember when Motorola as an organization was like the big dog on the block? Right? You remember? I'm dating myself a little bit. But you remember when Motorola was like the big dog? Are they still the big dog? Right? You probably got to go to Walmart and really search to find something that says Motorola on it. Right? But why is that? Why do organizations that are at the top of their game lose their footing? They forget who their customers are. And they get comfortable. They get really comfortable. We're good. We don't need to look, our profit margin is great. Everything that we're doing right now, we just need to keep sailing this course. The problem with that is the world is always changing. And if you are not keeping up with the changes that are happening in the world, no matter how hard you try to stop the clock, you can take the battery out of a clock, but guess what? Time keeps ticking, right? Whether or not your battery is working or not, time keeps marching on. And if you are not positioning your organization to not just stay with the flow of traffic, but in some cases to get ahead, chances are, in a few years, your organization will be irrelevant. So if you want to maintain relevancy in your industry, in your market, then making sure that your policies that you are implementing, the processes that you engage in as an organization, the people that are leading your organization, not just your frontline people, right? But the people that are in the spaces that you're in making decisions. I can tell you about an example of another organization, a global organization that made a really big mistake a few years back. Coca-Cola was rolling out a marketing campaign, and I heard somebody mention something about marketing earlier. They were rolling out a marketing campaign in their East Asian market, right? And they had these really, seasoned marketing professionals. We got this. Well, the problem is, long story short, the marketing campaign that they rolled out just happened to be extraordinarily culturally insensitive to the East Asian culture, right? They did not understand that in Chinese culture, death and elders are held in a very different esteem than they may be in the Western world. So they were making light of it in the commercial. They had spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and it failed miserably. What was the one thing that could have changed that, could have saved them that loss, profit loss? Was having somebody in the room when they were deciding to make that, pull the trigger on that marketing decision and be like, you know what? That's probably not going to go over well. let's take a step back and think about this. That would have saved them the international embarrassment, the fact that not that they didn't recover eventually in that market space, but the amount of time that it took to rebuild all of the trust, when all it took was having somebody in the room when you were making that final call to be like, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. You might want to reconsider. And so that's one of the reasons why it's important for you not only to have, be able to check the box and say, well, we've implemented a workforce diversity program. You're checking a box. That means absolutely nothing. Unless the result is that you are changing the culture of your organization to truly be inclusive, to truly be equitable. And as an organization, just like with any continuum of growth, you may start out as an organization just taking baby steps, right? And typically the first part of an organization's engagement with equity is counting, right? You count heads. How many people do we have? Fill in the blank. That's kind of elementary. But as you mature in equity work within your organization, then you start getting into the meat of what you do. You start looking at the threads in your organization, the policies, your processes, your programs, representation at the decision-making table. Who's on your board? Who's in the boardroom? And is it truly representative of the community that you live in? Is it representative of the clients that you serve? And if it's not, start making changes. Start making changes. Because there's one thing about the community that I'm pretty sure anybody that works with the community, they can see BS coming from 100 miles away, right? You can say whatever you want to say in the splashiest, shiniest marketing material. We are all about diversity. But people know when you are being authentic and you are being honest and when you're not. Because the proof is in the pudding. They can see that, you may have spent X millions of dollars, but they will be able to see if you have a picture of your senior leadership team and it looks like they're quadruplets, right? They can see that. People are not stupid, right? And they can see if you take a snapshot of your board and they all look like they're at a cousin's retreat, right? They can see that because that plays out in how you engage with the community. So you really do need to make sure that you are being intentional, and it's much, much better to take your time and do it right than to do it quick, right? People can put pressure on you and be like, well, we need to have something to give the community in 3 months. Okay, you can do that, but is it going to be meaningful? Is it going to last beyond whoever is in leadership that asked you to do that? If they were to leave, is that program dead? Is it still funded? All of those things matter. And if you truly want to make sure that your organization is inclusive and equitable, it starts with once you mature as an organization, it starts with looking at your policies. Looking at if you are in an industry that can influence legislation, both at the local, the state, and the federal level. Making sure that you have backup, right, for the things that you want to make sure continue into perpetuity, not just because of your tenure there, but what's going to happen when you are promoted or you leave and go to another organization. Is that program going to fall apart? So I want to take, I know that we're short on time, but I want to take questions that you may have. Yes. Oh, sorry.
I was just wondering, in this work, don't we have to first address bias? And it seems like white, brown, black, we don't get together and actually talk real. And so it feels like the work actually can't move forward until, I mean, I'm not invited to those conversations. And until I can get my team to actually be vulnerable enough to talk about what's deeply rooted in them and why there's a barrier, how can we actually accomplish this?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I will tell you that in this day and age, I don't need to, unless you've been hiding under a rock in the past couple of years, but I don't need to tell you that there is a movement out there that people are apprehensive about having tough conversations, right? I don't want to talk about anything that makes me uncomfortable. And if that were the case, you wouldn't walk, right? Babies would never walk. It's tough. They fall down, they cry, they skin their knee. But eventually you keep making them get up, right? Unless you want to carry them around. And there have been some situations where I've seen like some 5-year-olds on hips. And I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. That's not a long-term plan. But there are anything that's worthwhile, you're going to have to face some kind of resistance, right? Muscles atrophy when you don't use them. And when you start to push this idea that nothing should be hard, you're really setting people up, communities, organizations, individuals, you're setting them up for failure. Because eventually, those tough conversations are going to happen. And it's better to prepare people to have those conversations with practice, right? You have to start having those conversations. And first of all, understanding that bias is not relegated to one race or one gender. Everybody does it. If you have a brain that is working, bias is involved, right? And it's necessary because it keeps you from when you were 3 years old reaching up and touching a hot stove, right? You may have tried to do it, you felt the heat, or maybe you got burned once, and every since then, your brain now logs that information and says, oh, anytime you see a hot stove, don't touch it, right? That's your brain activity. Neuroscience supports this. So in that instance, it teaches you to stay away from hot stoves. It works the same way with engagements and socialization and exposure to people and situations and culture and language. When you don't have that exposure, your brain fills in blanks. And it fills in blanks with information that you already have. And if you don't have a lot of information, it ain't going to be a good outcome. Right? So it's important for us to make sure that we're having exposure to people that are different, that we practice having tough conversations that make us uncomfortable. It just means that you're human. If it didn't upset you because somebody else is upset, I'd be a little concerned. Right? I'd be a little concerned. But the fact that you have some type of feeling that somebody else might be upset or hurting, that's a sign that you're human. And that's okay. And so making sure that people, number one, understand what bias is, how it interacts physically with your brain, and making sure that that stays at the forefront of everything that you do, especially when it comes to making decisions. Understand the lens through which you see the world isn't the same as somebody, even if they're in the same household and grew up with you. I'm the youngest of 8 children, right? Same parents, same house. We went to the same schools. Not a single one of us is the same, right? We're not the same because our experiences were different. Even in the same house with the same parents, going to the same school. And so understanding how that plays a part in how we see the world and making assumptions that, well, of course, everybody fill in the blank. No, chances are everybody not fill in the blank. Right? And that cuts across identities. That cuts across race. That cuts across gender. That cuts across sexual orientation. That cuts across education level. That cuts across everything. There's so many different combinations. Yes, you have a question in the back.
Back in 2006, 2007, there was the Tarrant County Mental Health Connection, and they did a lot of surveys. They found that a lot of the organizations that were part of the Tarrant County Mental Health Connection, which included TCU, John Peter Smith, Tarrant County Juvenile, and a number of nonprofits, they said we have a diversity problem. We're having trouble retaining. We're having trouble being able to serve the populations that we're trying to serve. And so there was a whole movement that took place that was pretty well funded, and the curriculum was called CBMCS. And I noticed that they engaged the top level of the organizations, the CEOs, the leadership of all of those groups. They went through this 2-day training, and then they signed off on it and said, yes, this is what we need to do. It encompasses everything pre-DEI terminology, right? And so we talked about ageism and sexism, and what I noticed was that when we got to LGBTQ plus conversations, and when we got to race, the wheels tended to fall off pretty quickly because of what you were describing, right? That once the conversation got really, really tough, people began to pull back. I saw how they improved the facilitators over time, but then I also noticed that the leadership got really uncomfortable with the conversations that started to take place within the organizations. And there was an exodus that happened that really only left like All Church Home, Santa Fe Youth Adolescent, Juvenile Services, and the Women's Center. Those were like the 4 major groups that stuck with it. But there was like people who were marginalized, right? People who began to adopt a new language. So like I heard, the police officer using the word minority. Like the language, right, means so much. Words have power. And we knew back in 2006, 2007 what the demographics were going to look like that was shared with us last time we were together. People of color are now the majority. Even we were told back then, right, majority, minority is a play on words. It's mathematically impossible. Thank you, I've never heard that. So it's not necessarily just, well, I guess it is just a question. It's like that faded because the leadership got really uncomfortable with the conversations that started to come into their organizations, particularly women and people of color. And so we started to notice the intersectionality of what that conversation looked like. So my question is this, right? Then what are the successes that you're seeing already? What are the challenges that you're dealing with? Because I'm curious to see how similar they look from 2007-ish, right? And as that went on. And because what I did notice was a powerful movement in the upgrade of vocabulary, that people could enter a space now knowing that they were triggering other people just simply based on the language that they had been raised with, and were completely unaware that words were offensive, right? And to me, that created a really powerful dynamic within the organizations that I saw that stuck with it. They started having book clubs and movies, and they started watching documentaries, and they would give CEU credits for that, right? And I also noticed that eventually there was a higher turnover as those voices came to the forefront. And I also noticed a pattern, because we had conversations at the committee level, of people that started to leave because then they were no longer deemed appropriate. And because of the voice that they brought to the table, they were no longer promotable because they were disruptors now. So it's as if CBMCS created this language and this movement of people feeling for the first time in their career that I could speak my truth, I could articulate my message, but now I'm being countered by not being allowed to move. So what are some successes and challenges that you're seeing already?
That's a lot. That's a lot. But I can answer your question, and then we're going to have a whole nother, it's not even coffee, this is like dinner, conversation about everything else. So one of the tangible ways that we've been able to implement some changes around language and the importance of language is this idea of the SMMA, super majority minority areas that, or MMAs, that the city was using. Again, in the continuum, it was kind of one of those first steps where we're starting to have these conversations. But that was how we were prioritizing infrastructure projects, by looking at whether or not the project was in a geographic location that was deemed SMMA, or super majority minority. And so what that meant was, is this an area with 75% or more for a super minority, majority minority, and 50% for an MMA, a majority minority area? Is this project in an area where that's the case? Well, the problem with that is a couple of things. Number one, to your point, and then the 2020 census just really confirmed that data-wise, is that the city of Fort Worth is predominantly residents of color, right? By the numbers. And we're all going to agree on the numbers, right? So they aren't minority. That's a mathematical term, and it is impossible to have a majority minority mathematically, right? It's just not possible. So we have shifted from just using race as a way to prioritize projects, and now we have moved to what we're calling geographic disparity zones that take into account more than just race. Because what we found is when we were making those little outlines of areas using just race as a factor, we were including neighborhoods that had like $500,000, $1 million homes, right? Why are we saying that's a disparity? That's number one. Number two, and equally as important and offensive, is this notion that anytime you see a cluster of racialized groups, that automatically means disparity. Right? That's what we're saying. And that is not always the case. There are multiple factors involved in the disparities that are created, especially in a municipality. Right? You have to look at education level. You have to look at parental status, children under 5 without critical 4-star child care within distance from their home. Like, there are all these other factors. And so now that's the way that we're looking at how to prioritize resource allocation, right? Instead of just looking at a race and saying, oh, this is a black area, there's disparity there. This is Hispanic, oh, there's disparity. No, that is not the case. That is not always the case. And so that's one of the ways that we've changed. The second way is within our department, since we have oversight of our ordinance that deals with contracting over contracts over $100,000, equity in contracts over $100,000, we don't use the term MWBE or MBE, Minority Business Enterprise, or minority women business enterprise. We call them business equity firms. Because in Fort Worth, they ain't the minority, right? They are not. And so when we look at it in that context and then match that, something as simple as changing how we characterize, how we speak about these businesses, we marry that with the data.
I'm going to have to call timeout on here.
Oh.
I'm sure it is, but we're getting behind schedule. Christina, thank you for being here. Let me ask you, if your office deals primarily internally at the city?
We do both.
You-
So we.
Are you a resource?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we can't assist you directly, we know who can. So we have business equity partnerships. We have 5 organizations that we just did an RFP and pulled them together that will serve as a resource for people in the community. So just because we don't have capacity in our small department, but we do, if we can't help you directly, we have partner organizations that sit in the community that can, and we can certainly make those connections.
That's great. I think that really, Mike, that really answers your question from a while ago. Where do you turn for help in this arena? And the answer is your office can be helpful.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. All right. Well, part of all this is finding out about resources that are available in the community, and that's great. Thank you for being here. Let's thank you. Okay, here's the plan. I've been instructed, and we're a little bit behind schedule. We're going to go out in the foyer here and do a picture, recording history, very important. And then we come back in here for lunch, and we have a special treat for you today. Dr. Ray Perryman, who is a widely known, well-recognized economist, is here. He always comes and speaks to LeaderPrime. We appreciate that. He is a very entertaining and educational speaker. You're going to really enjoy that. He holds a BS in mathematics from Baylor University and a PhD in economics from Rice University. He always felt that the BS would have been better, somehow more appropriate for economics. He took his first economics course on a coin flip between economics and psychology. If it had gone the other day, there might be some really other way. There might be some really messed up people in the world. This is pretty good. You wrote this yourself, I thought. Yeah, well, Dr. Perryman has received an honorary doctorate from the International Institute of Advanced Studies. After that one, he told his kids they had to start calling him Doctor. They preferred dork, dweeb, nerd, geek, and loser. And that was on a good day. Anyway, Ray has come and spoken with LeaderPrime class, I think, every year. And he always is entertaining. He has a great perspective on the economy, politics, and what's going on in the world. So, Dr. Ray Perryman, right?
Well, thanks, Ken. I appreciate it very much. It's a pleasure. Is this working okay? We're good? Okay, good deal. It's a pleasure to be here with you and spend a few minutes. I understand you're a little bit behind schedule. I'm not the one to get you back on schedule. I can promise you that. That's not what I do. I don't think I've ever got anybody back on schedule in my life. Hopefully I won't get so wound up that we can't have a few questions at the end. It is a privilege to be here. As Ken mentioned, and by the way, before I start, this man has given a lot of great service to this community. I'd like y'all just give him a round of applause. I'm serious. For decades. No, it's awesome. We've been friends a very, very long time, and it's always a pleasure. The reason that I work in Waco and live in Odessa is I've always worked in Waco, and 30 years ago I married the mayor of Odessa. Okay. And the first law of economics, I don't care what any textbook says, the first law of economics is if you marry the mayor, you move. Okay, that's it. So I ended up in Odessa. And but the weird thing was, I travel all the time. In a typical year, I'm like on the road 300 days, 275, 300 days every year. So she always told people the secret to our marriage was we've been married for 30 years and together 3 weeks. And then along comes COVID, you know, and all of a sudden I'm home for 300 days in a year. That was a big, big, big adjustment, I have to tell you. And one day I was on her absolute last nerve, just absolute last nerve. And I think it's one of those days that ends in a Y because those are my worst. But anyway, so I finally said, you know, honey, the problem here is, you know, I'm here all the time now. I said, you know, I'm kind of like bad tasting medicine. I'm just better in smaller doses. And she said, no, you're nothing like bad tasting medicine, because ultimately bad tasting medicine makes you feel better. So, don't choke, okay? It's okay, okay. Since you almost choked, I'll do one more, okay? Another story about my wife, as Ken mentioned, I've got an interesting resume. I've got to do a lot of interesting things in my life, and a lot of people have said nice things about me, some not so nice. That comes with the territory. In fact, there was an editorial written about me in the Corpus Christi paper about a week or two ago that said I was an equal opportunity offender because I make both parties mad at once sometime or another. But anyway, a few years back, this one really meant something to me. I grew up in a little rural town about 100 miles from here in East Texas, and they started a Distinguished Alumni Award at the school a few years back, and they were kind enough to give it to me. And so I went back and saw some old friends and had a nice time. And my wife asked me what it was like growing up in a town that small. And man, it was great. I loved it. It was wonderful. And she said, well, were there any challenges? And I said, no, not really. I said, nobody knocked their door. Everybody knew everybody. It was great. Good place to grow up. And she said, well, there had to be problems in a town that small. And so being kind of smart like that I can be sometimes, I said, well, we did have this one problem. I said, it was so small. This always bothered me a little bit. We had to take driver's education and sex education in the same car. And she thought about it a minute, and she said, Ray, that makes perfect sense. You can't drive either. So just want you to know the respect I get at home, okay? Okay. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to try to cover a lot of different things because there's a lot going on in the economy right now. And hopefully I can make a little bit of sense out of it in some ways that may be a little bit different once you're on the news and that sort of thing. And having heard Christina, I'm probably going to add in a couple of things I wouldn't add in otherwise, which is just what you want me to do when you're already behind schedule. But she kind of inspired me to talk about a couple of issues I think are important as well. So anyway, let me start out with, none of us want to dwell on COVID. It's very nice that we can all be together in one place and sit here in a room together. That's a nice luxury that we all took for granted for most of our lives, and now I think we appreciate it a lot more. I didn't mind putting on pants at all this morning to come talk to y'all. I really didn't, After 2 years of giving speeches by Zoom where I have no idea if, I wouldn't have even known you nearly choked, if it hadn't been, I might have kept going and killed you, But anyway, but I don't want to dwell on it, but there's a couple of things about it just to kind of give you perspective I do want to mention and then kind of tell you where we are relative to that now and a little bit about where I think we're going. And then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about all the stuff in the news right now, supply chains and inflation and Ukraine and workforce and all that stuff, because it's all, we're just kind of bombarded with economic news right now, and more seems to come every day. And then toward the end, I'm going to preach a little bit. I'll get on my soapbox. It's kind of, like I said, kind of inspired on that. And when I do, when I get on my soapbox, I'm almost 5'7", so I'm pretty dangerous at that point. I just want to let you know. But anyway, the first thing that was different about this than what we normally see is, normally when we have a recession in this country, you probably had a text class at some point in your life where they told you about a business cycle. We hadn't really had those in a long time. We really haven't. And we never had a sine curve. It was never that good. But business cycles really happened back when they first started teaching us about economics, because most economies were agrarian. And if you're an agricultural economy, you're going to have cycles. As you get more complicated, though, one thing can go up, something else can go down, and you can kind of keep rolling along okay on the whole. And we certainly see that in Texas, because basically when the price of oil goes up, everybody else doesn't like it, and there's certain parts of our economy that like it a whole lot. And so same thing, when oil goes down, our oil guys don't like it. Everybody else likes it because everything else gets cheaper. So, it ebbs and flows. Normally when we have a recession, it's because we did something stupid. That's how we usually have a recession. We create a bubble of some sort by going crazy. The last one was mortgages. The one before that was dot-com stocks. The one before that was syndications. We threw one in the middle with forgetting that we had to balance our debits and credits, and so we had one for that. But it's always something we do that's kind of stupid, and there's kind of a programmed way we deal with those. The president has a summit. The president appoints a task force. We all get together and figure out kind of ways we might fix it a little bit, get all that through Congress. And at that point, they're scared enough they'll pass something, and then we go on down the road. And that's kind of how it usually works. This one was like a bolt of lightning from the outside. I mean, we'd never seen anything quite like this before. And the thing about it was how fast and how hard it was. That was one thing that made it so different and so hard to deal with. And you all had to deal with it in your own businesses, personal lives, every other way. We all did. But just to give you a little bit of perspective on the numbers, during the Great Recession back in 2008, the one with all the mortgages, which was at that time the worst thing we'd had since the Great Depression, over a course of 14 months, we lost 9.4 million jobs in this country. 700,000 jobs a month. I mean, it was brutal. It really was. This one, 22 million jobs in 2 months. 2.5 times as many jobs, 1/7 the time. I mean, we had never seen things. In April alone of 2020, we dropped 20 million jobs in 1 month. The greatest recession we'd had in a century only did half that amount in 14 months. I mean, it was just just a bolt of lightning that hit us. And the second thing was, even though we started making progress after that, just how hard it was to come back. And I'm going to give you one more set of statistics on that, then I'm going to move on to other stuff and talk about kind of where we are now relative to where we were then. But think about this for a minute. There's a number that only geeks like me ever paid attention to. Before the pandemic, they started covering it a little bit in the paper lately, and more people pay attention to it, a thing called initial claims for unemployment. Now, we have a rule in economics, never use one word when four will do, okay? Initial claims for unemployment is layoffs. I mean, think about that. Why do you file an initial claim for unemployment? Because you lost your job. It's layoffs, okay? That's what it is. The highest that number, and the reason we started paying attention to it so much in the pandemic was it comes out once a week. So it was a real good snapshot. When you didn't know what was going on, this was a snapshot. You get kind of a quick look at where we were. The highest that number had ever been, since we've been keeping records, was back in the mess in the 80s. 1 week it got to 695,000. During the Great Recession, it got to 660,000. But we had never seen 700,000 since we've been keeping these records, which goes back several decades. We'd never seen 700,000. 1 week in April of 2020, it was 6.9 million. 10 times the biggest number we'd ever seen. But let this sink in. That's bad enough. It did not go below 700,000 for 54 straight weeks. We had never seen 700,000 before. So for 54 straight weeks, we had more layoffs than we had ever had before. I mean, that just gives you perspective of just how much this was to deal with and how different it was and how tough it was. Fortunately, some other people were getting hired along the way. So, but that was how bad it was. Of course, now we're at record low levels because of some of the workforce stuff I'll talk about in a minute. Well, where are we? Well, this morning you may have seen, if you got up early enough and before this thing started, we gained 400,000 jobs in the United States this last month, 428,000 according to the first release. That gets us back to where we're about 1 million down from where we were before the pandemic ever started. So we're almost back to where we were in February of 2020. We're 1 million jobs down. That's less than 1%. Workforce is about 150 million, so that's we're down under 1% now. That's we're making headway. Here in Texas, we lost 1.4 million jobs when this thing happened. It's a lot. As of November of last year, we broke even again. The state's now up 240,000. So we're outperforming the country by quite a bit there. The Metroplex, you got back in 15 months. Okay, you're up 180. You were down about 425,000. You're now up by 180,000. Now let that sink in for a minute. The state's up by 240,000. The Metroplex is up by 180,000. Okay, Austin, which is smaller, but they've been doing well too. They're up by 80,000. So if you add the Metroplex and Austin together, you get 260,000. The state is up 240,000. So everybody else, some are better, some are worse, but everybody else on balance is not quite breaking even yet. Okay? But the big generators of growth that have been that way for the last couple of decades are the ones leading us out of this as well. In all honesty, I got good news and bad news about that. Dallas kind of beat y'all so far. They've grown a little bit faster than you have. That's not really bad news, but it's just a fact. Okay, but the last 2 or 3 months, you've been kicking them. Okay, and I think you're about to kick them even more, okay? And here's the reason why. It's a very simple reason. Both are big, diverse economies with a lot of things going on, but Fort Worth, because of the Barnett Shale and the aftermath of that, has a little more energy dependence than Dallas, okay? And energy's been one of the slowest ones to come back. That's about to change. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, okay? The other thing is both communities are big centers of tourism and visitation and that sort of thing, but relatively you're a lot bigger than they are because you've got the big stadiums, the big theme parks, the art museums. We did a study on the cultural impacts of various cities in Texas a number of years ago, and hands down Fort Worth was number one. I mean, nobody else was even close, you know. I mean, you are kind of a cultural tourism kind of center, and that industry has had a hard struggle getting back. And so you had kind of two that were a little bit more difficult to work with than the composition of Dallas. And that's why yours was just a little bit slower than Dallas. But still, again, right up there, you know, again, you're knocking the top out and net gains in jobs and before the state started having them and that sort of thing. It's all, and again, I think that industry has started to really pick back up now, the tourism side. Energy's about to. I think we had more drilling permits issued in March of this year. We don't have the April data yet, but we had more drilling permits issued in Texas in March of this year than any month in the history of this state. Okay? That tells you something. And I'll get into more of the whys and wherefores of all that in a minute. So that's kind of where things are. As far as the forecast is concerned, we're projecting our 5-year forecast for output in this region, in this area, in Dallas-Fort Worth area, is about 3.8%. It's about 2.2% job growth. Those are really good numbers, a little bit front-loaded. We'll do a little bit more this year because we're still kind of getting some things back, and then get down to more normal levels. That's in line with where you've been growing for a long time. But and we don't see anything that's going to knock us off that train. I'm not one of those who thinks we're about to have a recession, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes as well. It's very rare that you gain 400,000 jobs in a month if you're about to have a recession. That doesn't happen very often. In fact, in the history of the world, it's happened 0 times. Okay, so I feel pretty good about that one right now. But some folks are predicting it. You know, some folks are always predicting it, though. You know, and you only have to be right occasionally in this business. Anyway, so what I thought I'd do now is kind of backtrack and spend. Usually, I spend a lot of time on the local economy when I come talk to this group, but there's so much going on right now. I thought I'd kind of bring it back up to a higher level and talk about the supply chains, inflation, and all that kind of stuff, and try to give you a little bit different perspective on them, and what's happening, what's not happening, and that sort of thing. Because a little of it is not covered quite as well as it should be in the media sometimes. They don't quite peel that onion back quite enough layers to really give you the kind of common sense of it all, and I'm going to try to do some of that. But I can start anywhere. They're all kind of related to each other. But let's start with supply chain. Do this for me. Use your imagination for a minute. Think of the biggest engine that you can possibly imagine. Okay? Double it. Triple it. Quadruple it. Think about $100 trillion engine. Okay? Because that's what the world economy basically is. Okay? And that engine's been humming along for 10 years, doing just fine. I mean, you know, oil change every now and then, but it's doing okay. A little bump here and there, but I mean, it's just chugging on down the road. Seems to have plenty of sea legs left in it. Doesn't need a major tune-up or anything like that. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you stop it. And I don't mean you tap on the brakes. I mean, you turn off the key, jump out, and let it hit a tree. Okay. And then you get a bunch of folks, and you get a bunch of sledgehammers, and you go over there and just bang on that sucker for a while. I mean, just all over the place. Just knock it around as much as you can. And you just let it sit out in the elements for about 6 or 8 months. Okay. Then you kind of try to restart it, and you get it kind of futzing along just a little bit. And you say, oh, no, that doesn't feel good. Let's just hit another tree and do it all over again. Okay. And then you try to restart it. That's what we did. Okay. It would not be a smooth startup. And the global economy has not been a smooth startup because we can't get all the stuff it takes to make all the other stuff all in the right place, produced like it should be, and doing everything else like it should be all at one time. It takes a while to get that done. It takes a while to get stuff back into the ports and everything. And it's creating a real crisis. The one thing I'll say about it is, and there's not much I can say good about it is, but markets, I have a whole lecture I've made students endure from time to time. You won't have to do it, I promise. But about markets, about what's great about markets and what doesn't work so well about markets. You know, but one of the best things about markets is the minute you create a problem, you automatically create the incentive to solve the problem. All of you know that in your business. I mean, you're trying to meet some need that's out there. I mean, if there's a need, there's profit in meeting that need. And so, you know, we have a vested interest in getting the supply chain on track, and we're making progress. If you would have asked me a month ago, I'd said, "I'll give us 4 or 5 months and we'll have this thing back on track." If you ask me now, I'll say, "I'll give us 6 months and we'll have the thing back on track." And the reason I changed it was a couple of things. The Ukrainian situation has messed it up again. Okay. And and China suddenly decided not to produce anything for a while, has messed it up some more. So there's just a lot of headwinds on all that right now, but we are making progress on it. You know, things that normally we can roll with 1 or 2 kind of bad things happening in the economy if everything else is chugging along, but when you got something like the pandemic going on, 1 or 2 little bad things can really mess you up. Like there's 3 big plants around the world that produce chips, the chips that we use in most cars and all that stuff that have been hard to come by, refrigerators, washing machines, all that stuff. Just so happened we had a fire in one of them in South Korea right in the middle of this thing. You know, again, we could roll with that under normal circumstances. We could figure it out. But when you layer on the pandemic, it becomes harder. Y'all may have heard about it, but last year in February, we had a little cold snap here in Texas. And you might think, well, what does that have to do with anything? People don't realize this. 1 out of every $5 of international trade in this country is Texas. We are a huge part of the global economy. When you shut our ports, and that big airport not far from here, down for 9 or 10 days and cargo can't get in and out, you've messed up that supply chain some more. I mean, it's measurable. It's big enough to affect what happens. So all of these things were happening at once, kind of messing us up with the supply chain. But by the same token, we're double shifting the ports. We're doing things, we're making progress. You've heard some numbers recently that the trade deficit hit an all-time high. And all these guys on TV start wringing their hands about it. You know what that means is? It means we unloaded boats. No, they're not imports until you get them into the place and do some paperwork. You know, we unloaded more boats, so the trade deficit went up. You just saw another one, man, they went crazy over this one last week. The GDP went down last quarter by 1.4%. Oh, man, recession's coming. It's terrible. It's awful. If you take imports, the fact that imports went up, because that takes away from GDP, because that's something coming in from somewhere else, not ours. You have to subtract that from GDP. If you had to endure that chapter on national income accounting sometime, you might remember that. If you pull that out, the economy grew by 2% last month. The entire reason we had a downturn in the economy was we unloaded more boats. Okay? So, I mean, that's what it is. I mean, that's why I said, you know, some of this stuff you have to kind of peel that onion back a little bit, but if you break down the numbers, that's what it was, okay? Which means we're making progress on this. It's going to be with us a few more months. Can't get away from it immediately. Let me kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about it. And of course, Ukraine has really made it bad because it messed up the oil markets, and I'll say a little more about that as we go along. Let's shift over to inflation for a minute. That's a complicated one right now. There's a lot going on with inflation, okay? And a couple of things I'll tell you about. First of all, I'll kind of break my story into short term and long term. Okay. Within the short term, there's an old definition that you've probably heard somewhere of inflation. Everybody uses it. Man on the street definition: too much money chasing too few goods is what causes inflation. And there's merit to that. It's a decent definition. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay. Either one of those can mess you up. Well, we know we have too few goods. We just talked about that. That's the supply chain. We also have too much money. And here's what happened. Y'all probably heard that the government spent a whole bunch of money in the last couple of years, more than we usually do. We usually blow about $1 trillion a year, but we managed to blow 7 or 8 in this time period. Now, I am not faulting us for that. We had to do some of that. I mean, you had people would have starved to death in the streets. Very well-run small businesses that have been around for decades could not have survived. We had to do it. It certainly wasn't perfect. We're seeing all kinds of reports about the fraud right now. We know they sent some checks to dead people. I mean, you know, and in all fairness, there were some problems in the structure of the bills. That's inevitable when you have to cobble something like that together with an evenly split Congress. There's going to be some of that. But beyond that, just it's endemic to government. They can't do it in the most efficient way. For example, take the child care credit. They can't go knock on everybody's door and say, okay, how you doing? You need a little more money for your kids? Okay, no, you're doing okay. Okay, that's fine. Let's talk about you. Okay, you need a little money? Okay, here you go. You can't do that. You have to write a formula. And what that means is some people get some money they don't need. So they got extra money. A whole bunch of people got a lot of extra money out of this thing. In fact, one of the weirdest statistics of this whole pandemic is every time you have a recession, output goes down, of course. income goes down, of course, and jobs go down. I mean, that's kind of what a recession is. This time, output went down, jobs went down, income went up. And it went up because of all this money we put out there, okay? So all of a sudden, you got all these people, and they've been cooped up for a year and a half. Can't do anything. Just frustrating as it can be. And all of a sudden, you kind of ring the bell and say, okay, y'all, you folks can go out and do something right now. And by the way, you got some extra money in your pocket. Well, what do you think they do? They rush out and start spending that stuff. That's your too much money, okay? And again, I'm not faulting us for that. Again, I fault us for any of you who've heard me speak before. Now, I've been very critical of the federal government for years on the way they spend. A good friend of mine, I'm sure you knew, who was a very successful no, he's still alive. He's just not a politician anymore. Very successful politician used to tell me that the difference between Republicans and Democrats was they'll both spend more than you give them, but the Republicans will feel bad about it. In the last 10 years, they hadn't even felt bad about it. Democrats get in, they spend like it's going out of style. Republicans get in, they cut taxes and don't do anything to offset it. I mean, we just had this roller coaster of $1 trillion deficits. I have a lot of problems with that. We didn't have a choice with this one. What we were confronting was a bad choice. Let's jack up the deficit in a big way and jack up the debt. And a catastrophic choice. Let's let businesses go under and people starve. Fortunately, we picked the terrible choice. Okay? There wasn't a good one over here somewhere we missed. You know, that wasn't one of them. So basically, you know, we have to work our way through that. So that's a big part of the inflation. The oil situation in the Ukraine has made it worse, because people are trying not to use Russian oil. There's uncertainty about future production of Russian oil. We could certainly replace Russian oil over time, but that's a big 2 words, over time. You can't do it immediately because you got to have more boats than we have. You got to have more drilling equipment than we have. You got to have more pipelines than we have. I mean, there's ways you could do that. There's ways we can do it with alternative energies, and as we deal with some climate issues as well, partially over time. But it's not the sort of thing you can do tomorrow. You know, so that's really messed things up a little bit, made it even worse. And what people don't realize about that is everybody focuses on the price of gasoline. In fact, one of the biggest problems we have with short-term inflation is, in most people's minds, inflation's not the consumer price index. You don't wake up every morning and say, wonder what CPI did today. We don't do that, you know. But you're going to drive by 20 gas stations today at least, and you're going to see that price there in big lights. And so we focus on the price of gasoline. Well, that's up 30, 40%. So our perception of inflation is really, really bad, okay? And it's bad enough without that, okay? But that's one issue. But the other thing people forget is, you know, we got some publicity the last couple of days. Petroleum's also diesel and jet fuel, okay? But forget about that even. It's plastics. It's synthetic fibers. It's paint. It's cosmetics. It's adhesives. You know, I mean, all this stuff is petroleum. It's all made out of petroleum. So when the price of oil goes up that much, it's not just what you're paying at the pump. You're jacking up the price of a lot of things, not to mention everything you buy is transported in some way or another with something that uses some type of petroleum product. And so that's why it has that disproportionate impact on things. So anyway, that's kind of the short-term story on inflation. The headlines you're seeing, and they're technically accurate. Worst since the late Carter years, early Reagan years, worst in 40 years, worst in 45 years, whatever. That's an accurate statement. This is not that time period. This is absolutely 100% not like that time period. And I'm going to give you just a quick example to kind of show you, but I can tell you, I can really come at this firsthand. When I was a little bitty baby economist, okay, and I wrote my dissertation at Rice back in the mid-'70s. I know I look much younger, but what can I say, you know. I got my PhD at 4, so I was, you know, but no, I wish. But anyway, when I wrote my dissertation, it was part of it was a big, huge model of the monetary sector. And back in those days, big, huge models were kind of a new novel thing. This was almost 50 years ago, so there wasn't one on every block like there is now, you know. And so when Ronald Reagan brought in Paul Volcker as the chairman of the Federal Reserve to try to bring inflation under control when it was 13, 14%, I had the only model out there. So I was still in my 20s, and they brought me up there to they didn't let me make any decisions, but they made sure I was doing the measuring, you know. And so I got to kind of see that from the inside and kind of see what was going on. And what we had then that we don't have now was institutional inflation. And what I mean, and we haven't done that again. We tore it down. It was very painful to tear it down. We tore it down. We haven't built it back. None of you are probably old enough to remember this. Ken probably is. But if you went into a bank or a savings and loan in the 70s or early 80s, and you wanted to open a savings account, We're not talking even buying a CD. We're just a plain old savings account. You got 5% interest. He remembers it. I remember it. If you go in today, you're going to be lucky to get one. Okay, real lucky to get one. You know, you probably have to buy a 3-year CD to get one. You know, and so and my point being, you kind of set a floor on the cost of funds when you do that. Federal contracts back then were set up with 30-day escalation clauses. They raise the price every 30 days in the contract. You know, none of that stuff's there now. We don't have that institutional inflation. We have a situation where people have to spend out all this extra money. Now it won't take them that long, and we have to fix the supply chain. Then it'll start coming down some. Go look at the long-term inflation expectations numbers. They're up about 0.5%. I'm transitioning to long-term now. Wasn't that smooth? Yeah. And I think they will go up about 0.5%, 1% or so from where they were before, because they were about 1.5%. They're going to go to 2.5%, and the reason is we spent all that money. It wasn't a free thing. You know, as I say, it was a bad choice versus a catastrophic choice. That's part of the bad choice. The Fed's having to raise interest rates now to kind of bring this thing in. They're having to get that balance sheet back under control because, man, they really bloated that sucker up during the pandemic. They had to. And so now they got to bring it back under control. All of that is going to bake in a little more long-term inflation in the future than we had in the past, but not really enough to hurt anything. And so that's kind of where we see, you know, what's happening with inflation. How fast it comes down, a lot's going to depend on what happens in the Ukraine and with the energy markets and that sort of thing. Europe deciding to try to wean itself from Russian oil this quickly will probably keep a little more upward pressure on prices because, again, no problem to do it over time. To do it immediately, the structure is just not there to do that quite yet. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But anyway, let me move on to the workforce because that's one we hear a lot about these days too. I'm trying to whip through these as fast as I can. The Great Resignation. Nobody's ever going to work again, okay? Here's the truth about that. It is a huge problem. Unlike the others I just talked about, it's not a temporary thing. It's not something that's just going to be in 6 months, 8 months, we won't even hardly remember it. It's not that kind of thing. It is a demographic reality that we are going to have a workforce shortage for a long time. Everybody's talking about the 10 million, 11 million job openings in the United States right now. They're forgetting to tell you there were 8 million before the pandemic. They're not telling you that. You know, 2020, we got the numbers out, lowest birth rate in history of the country. I mean, literally in the history of the country. I mean, you go back to the plague in Jamestown, and the population grew faster that year than it grew last year. I mean, we're talking bad stuff here, okay? And everybody said, well, that's because of COVID. Well, let's do a little math. We kind of, you know where I'm going with this. We kind of figured out COVID in right the middle of March of 2020. So we're about 10, 11 weeks in. We figured out COVID's going to be a big problem. It takes 40 weeks to make one of those babies. So whatever birth rate we had in 2020 wasn't because of COVID. That one was baked before COVID got cranked up. You know, now 2021 may be different. Okay, what that one was a continuation of an ongoing trend that's been going on for a long time. It was a little bit lower than the previous record, which was the previous year. 2021, when we get those numbers, may be interesting because a lot of people might have gotten scared and said, hey, okay, pandemic, we don't want to have a baby right now. We want to wait a while. By the same token, they were just together all the time with nothing else to do. So who knows what's going to happen. Yeah, but whatever it is, yeah. Yeah, but that's right. But whatever it is, it's an outlier. You know, I mean, we've been on this long-term trend that's going to continue. I suspect it's probably going to look pretty much like the recent years have made. The census that Christina mentioned just came out. We have 1 million fewer young people in this country under the age of 18 than we had 10 years ago. Okay, so we don't have enough people. I mean, that's the bottom line of why we have a workforce shortage. The workforce participation rate, which is where that Great Resignation thing comes from, was 63.4% of the working age population was in the workforce the month before the pandemic started. It's 62.4 right now. 1% less, okay? So we're not talking, I mean, this is not a radical, everybody's leaving the workforce. This is, we were already in a mess and this made it a little bit worse, okay? And when we come out of the pandemic, we're going to be in the mess because we're in the mess before the pandemic ever started. Okay, you know, there's a lot of ways we'll deal with it over time with some technology and some different things, and maybe hopefully at some point some sensible immigration reform. I mean, this is not rocket science. There are people all over the world that would love to come here and work. We desperately need people. You would think the two sides could get together and figure out a way to get them here, then let them work. That shouldn't be rocket science. But I think both sides like the issue more than they like solving the issue at this point, and that's a real problem for us, you know. But, and when I think about the immigration problem, again, I don't want to dwell on it. I know it's controversial. There's basically three elements to it right now. There's the folks coming over from Central America, and that's the one getting all the attention right now at the border. And it is a problem. It's a huge problem, no question. But the solutions we're proposing are not working. We're not going to do it with walls and guns, I can promise you. Because think about this for a minute. Most of you probably either have kids or you were somebody's kid at one time or something, you know, okay? I have 5 kids and 5 grandkids, so I can relate to this. If I was in a country where there was a drought going on and my kids were starving to death, and there were gangs in charge of that country who were going to wake up and kill them every day, okay? And I could walk somewhere and get away from that, I'd be walking. And if you send me back, I'm going to walk again. You know, I mean, you can't, that's human nature. That's inside us. You can't stop that. You're not going to stop it with a wall. You're not going to stop it with a gun. You're not going to stop it with any of that kind of stuff. You know, with making life tough on you, none of that. You're going to, you know, we really have to deal with the issues over there to solve that. But that's not our workforce issue. We've never counted on those folks for our workforce. The workforce has 2 pieces. One is the undocumented population, which also gets a lot of attention here in Texas especially. We have a big one. Bottom line is we need to figure out an immigration reform to use those folks because we need them. 1 out of every 10 people working in Texas today is undocumented. Today, this day, 1 out of every 10. 40% of our construction workforce, 40% of our agriculture workforce, 30% of our hospitality workforce. So if you want to go anywhere, grow anything, or build anything, we really need these folks to be here, okay? We need to figure out a way to do it that's rational and doesn't put them through what they go through, doesn't put employers at risk and all that. The other piece of it, which everybody forgets about, we have reduced legal immigration. In the middle of this workforce shortage, 5 years ago it was 1 million people a year. We got it down to 250,000. This makes no sense whatsoever. 25% of our doctors in this country are immigrants. If any of you work in the healthcare sector, you know what I'm talking about. 23% of our other healthcare workers are immigrants. If any of you are in the knowledge business, 23% of our scientists and engineers are immigrants. We need these folks. We've relied on these folks for a long time because we hadn't made people as fast as other places have made people, you know. And we're getting worse at it for some reason. So I mean, I did my part with 5 kids and 5 grandkids. You can't look at me. But anyway, you know, point being that you know, this one's going to be with us for a while. This is not a quick fix. You work through the pandemic, get through something, and then everything's okay. We're going to have to deal with this for a long time to come. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in just a few minutes, but I got 1 or 2 I want to talk about again. Energy, very quickly, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but you're in, you are in an area that has some energy, and you know the Barnett hadn't gotten a lot of attention lately, but that gas is still sitting there. It hasn't gone anywhere. And I want to talk about that for just a second here because it is very important. I think, did I mention at the beginning the column that they wrote about me a couple of weeks ago and called me an equal opportunity offender? Okay, here's where that came from. I was testifying down at the Texas legislature, and somebody asked me a question that got me off on energy, and I started talking about how the federal government was screwing it up and how the Democrats were screwing it up. I didn't realize it, but at the same moment, my office was releasing a study I'd just finished on how the Republicans were screwing up with those truck inspections at the border, okay? And so all of a sudden, within the span of literally 10 minutes, I've got media covering me saying something bad about the Republicans, saying bad about the Democrats. So this guy happened to catch it, and he wrote a column about it. So anyway, that's how that happened. But we are making some mistakes on climate. Climate is a huge issue. We fundamentally, absolutely have to deal with it. There's no question about it, okay? But we can't get to where they say they want us to go in the time they want us to go, and we don't have to. If you look at, this is what kills me, if you look at the Department of Energy's numbers, we got a study coming out on this soon. If you look at the Department of Energy's numbers, the same folks who say you can't drill for oil anymore, don't want you to, look at their numbers. They did 5 scenarios in their last energy report. Every one of them shows more oil and more natural gas in 2050 than today. And that's with renewables growing anywhere from 300% to 700%, depending on which scenario you pick. I mean, it's not saying, we're going to replace a lot of stuff with renewables, and we need to. But even with that, we're going to have to produce more petroleum. And a lot of that's going to be natural gas because it's lower carbon content than oil. And when you generate electricity with that to run your electric cars, you move it from pollution going up and down the road, like it does now in an internal combustion engine, to pollution at one spot at a power plant. So you can capture it a lot better. and sequester it a lot better. They're already doing it at the refineries. They have the technology to do it at the utilities. It's just not quite cost effective yet. But the cost will come down over time. All that'll change. But anyway, so basically it says we're going to have to produce this energy. And it turns out by a weird circumstance, obviously the natural gas is fine. That's what you have here. But if you go out to the Permian Basin where all the oil is, and this is just weird. I live out there now in Odessa, as he said. We can't claim any credit for it. Had to do with the tectonic plate shifting 250 million years ago. We had nothing to do with it. Nobody tweeted about it for a long time. I mean, it was kind of just happening. But the carbon content of the oil in the Permian Basin is the lowest of any onshore place in the world that has a major deposit of oil. We get most of our imported oil, people don't realize this, from Mexico and Canada. This oil from the Permian Basin has 71% less carbon than Mexico's and 74% less carbon than Canada's. 57% less carbon in the Middle East. So you at least start at a better place. You still have to produce it responsibly and then sequester as much of it as you can. You still have to do all that to make the climate thing work. You have to do it very differently. And that makes both sides mad at me. One side says it doesn't exist, we don't need to worry about it, do what it, drill, baby, drill. The other side says you can't drill at all. Well, the answer is kind of in the middle. You got to do it, but you got to do it more responsibly. And I think, again, we're about to see a lot of that happening with these prices where they are now. There's some realization of this. The other side of it, I'm going to give two things on the other side of it. One is world geopolitics we're dealing with right now. Everybody's talking about getting rid of Russia's oil. We can do that. We can produce plenty of oil. That's not a problem. It's going to take a little while. We can do that. That's not the source of Russia's power. The source of Russia's power is they control the natural gas that heats Eastern and Western Europe in the winter, and it gets really cold in some of those places. And that's what we have to fix. Expanding LNG capabilities and that sort of thing, getting to the point where if we did, and I told Congress this 10 years ago, if we could get to the point they didn't have to have Europe's natural gas, Russia's smaller than Texas economically. It becomes another mid-sized country whose ruler you couldn't name in a quiz show, that doesn't have the money to build a big military and doesn't have the ability to do all these things. The source of his power is controlling natural gas. We could fix that with natural gas that's just a few miles from here. Some of it's right here, literally right under the ground we're standing on, but a whole bunch of it's just a little bit west of here. And we could fix it with that and the natural gas in South Texas and East Texas and West Texas and a lot of other places. And most of the major LNG plants that are built now, we've done the permitting on all of them in the United States and Canada. Most of the ones that are built now and all the ones being permitted are on the Texas Gulf Coast. So we can fix that if they'll just let us. But anyway, the other piece of it though is humanitarian. And I really want to talk about that for a second. You and I were talking about it before we started. The alternative to not producing this energy is the world economy can't grow. The growth in the economy is happening in the emerging part of the world where they're shifting from agrarian economies to manufacturing economies, which is an energy-intensive shift, okay? If we don't produce the energy for them to grow, from all sources, all the above, renewables, everything, all of it, renewables, hydrocarbon, everything, if we don't produce energy for them to grow, there are 3 billion people in this world who live on $3 a day or less. There are 700 million people in this world, twice the population of our country, who live on $1.80 a day or less. That's a kind of poverty we can't even comprehend. The only way that gets solved is if we deal with the climate crisis and provide the energy that they need. And so that's kind of that's the current take on energy, like I say. And again, I wouldn't have spent that much time on it, but given where you are and that's what some of you may be in the industry, I don't know. I think it's important that we talk about that. Okay, that's a bunch of stuff. I am winding down, I promise, but I got a little bit more winding to do. I'm not quite there yet. Okay, we've talked about a lot of topics right now, but all of them in the news right now. But when you really get down to where's the economy going to be in 30 years or something like that, you can sweep away a lot of that. I mean, the stock market moves 1,000 points in one direction one day and 1,000 points in one direction the next day and all that kind of stuff. And, it's all that stuff. You can sweep all that away. When you get down to it, 3 things drive economies in the long term. One is trade and cost patterns. Where is it cheaper to make something? And how do we trade with it? And lately we buy a lot of stuff in Asia because it's cheaper over there. And we'll continue to buy a lot of stuff in Asia. But one thing the pandemic did was we already had the ESG movement kind of going on, environmental social governance, people focusing on a bit longer term thing than the next quarter. We already had that going on. This kind of put on steroids because they suddenly recognized it doesn't matter how cheap we buy those chips this quarter. If we can't get them delivered, it doesn't matter. Okay? So we're seeing what they call reshoring of some things. So that's actually probably going to help our growth just a little bit. And obviously, this area is in a great position to capitalize on that. Good example, I mentioned chips a moment ago. Hadn't been a chip plant built in 15 years since the Samsung plant in Austin. Been a long time since they built a chip plant in this country. In the last 3 months, we've seen TI announce a $30 billion one just up the road in Sherman. Samsung's announced an $18 billion one just down the road in Taylor. And Intel messed up and put one in Ohio for $20 billion. So that's almost $70 billion of investment in that industry that would not have existed had we not been given a wake-up call about that. And we're going to see that in other industries, particularly like medical supplies, things like that, things that we need to have here, to keep ourselves together. We're going to see that kind of stuff happening. The second one's technology. Technology drives a whole lot of what we do, more than we realize. It still amazes me when I sit down and think, I didn't know what a smartphone was 15 years ago, and you didn't either. Isn't that amazing? When you think about how much they rule our lives today, we didn't know what they were back then. I see y'all looking at them right now. I know you're cheating out there. Okay. No, but anyway, that's how technology changes. Technology was changing very quickly before the pandemic. We've been on a roll for a while. But the pandemic created more needs for security, for communications, for being able to provide health care in a pinch, and education in a pinch, and workplaces in a pinch, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so basically, that's that now thing about markets. We need more technology. We will get more technology, because if you're the one that provides it, you'll make a bunch of money. And so that'll probably help us a little bit. The third one, and it's the most boring subject in the world, demographics. I've already talked about it a little bit. But demographics, it's the science of how many people are born, how many die, and where they move in between. I have a really good friend who's a great demographer, used to run the Census Bureau. And I used to tell him, I said, Steve, I know why you're a demographer. I said, you're great with numbers, but you don't have the personality to be an accountant. It is one boring subject, And so anyway, so with demographics, I want to talk about it just a minute. And some of the stuff that Christina was talking about kind of hit me with this. But I mentioned we have 1 million fewer young people in this country than we had 10 years ago. We have 440,000 more in Texas than we had 10 years ago. That is the greatest single resource this state has. It's more valuable than all the tech plants, all the oil fields, and everything else, is that we have this pool of young people that can be the workforce of the future if we train them. 440. 440. In other words, the country's down 1 million. We made up almost half of it. If it hadn't been for us, it'd been down 1.5 million. That's, we did our part. And it's because we have a younger population, and a lot of that has to do with our demographics. The fact that, the Hispanic population is younger than other populations, and that's what's growing very rapidly here. Now I want to interpose that, though. It's our greatest opportunity that we have. It's also by far our greatest challenge. I want to interpose that, because you're leaders. You're folks who can make things happen. You're going to go out in this community and in your business, you're going to do things. Okay? You're people of influence. I want to layer demographics on top of that. Okay? 52% of the kids in our schools today are Hispanic. That's great. It's great, and it's growing very rapidly. The households those kids come from, if you add up the wealth of all the school-age households in this country or in the state, you say, how much of it do the Hispanics have? It's 5.7%. So you got 52% of the kids and 5% of the money. The black population is basically stable. It's not growing a whole lot, not declining a whole lot. It's right around almost 13% of the school enrollment's been there for a long time. 1.6% of the money. So you add those together, you got 2/3 of the kids and about 7% of the money. That doesn't work. That does not work without a whole lot of help from us. Because what that means is if they need broadband at the house, if they need a tutor, if they need a software package, a summer enrichment program, some extracurricular training, any of those things, it's just really, really hard. If they manage to get out of high school and want to go to a trade school, well over half of them have to drop out for family financial reasons. That's documented. So we've got some real challenges to meet there. To take it a step further, obviously they're growing very rapidly, that's one thing, but 20% of those kids that come in have a language barrier when they come into school. I do a whole lot of stuff in the humanitarian sector, and this one grabs me a lot. If you walk in 2 classrooms randomly, 1 kid's homeless on average. That's the reality of the demographic we deal with. The Anglo population is actually declining in schools because we don't have, we're not making babies like the rest of folks are. We have 125,000 fewer Anglo kids than we had 10 years ago, but we have 55,000 more that are economically disadvantaged. So, I mean, that's the school population that we're dealing with to turn into the future. Now, I'll give you two more statistics on, and then I'll shut up about it, okay? One of them's from the Census Bureau. It's a study they do every 2 or 3 years where they ask the question of all the people who are born and raised in a state, how many end up there as adults? Texas is always number one in that thing. The last one that came out was 78%. So roughly 4 out of every 5 kids that we educate in our public schools here in Texas are going to be in our workforce in the future, or not be in our workforce and be folks we have to try to take care of. But they're going to be living here, one way or the other. They're going to be here, okay? The final statistic does not come from the Census Bureau like all those others. This comes from a really great source. This comes from the Perryman group, and those guys are good. I am telling you they're good, man. Woo! And they're awesome. Now, not long ago, I did a little simulation for the legislature, and I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, let's assume the school system in Texas stays exactly like it is in terms of the percentages we graduate. We don't get better, we don't get worse, okay? And I'm talking elementary school, junior high, high school, college, graduate school, medical school, law school, whatever, everything, trade schools, everything. We just stay like we are. We don't get better, we don't get worse. And then before I ran the simulation, I put one more clause in there, by ethnic group. And then I just let demographics take over. Because that's not we don't control that half the equation. We control the other half the equation. In 15 years, taking out inflation, all that, in today's dollars, the average, not household, but person in this state has $6,000 less income than they have today. Now, what that means is we're no longer a state with a great workforce to attract all these big businesses. And we have a whole lot more social needs. So we're a whole lot more expensive state to try to live in and service. So we become exactly what we don't want to be. Exactly what in our worst moments we make fun of other states for being. You know, that's it. So basically, I say all that again because you are folks of influence. And in our communities, the single most important thing we can do to make sure this state grows in the future is to educate these kids. Okay. The second most important thing we'll do, and I wasn't going to probably get into this one, but it's only like a minute, I promise. But based on what Christina said, there's all kinds of political, religious issues and everything else associated with some of the things we're dealing with right now and some of the things she was talking about. And I don't want to try to change anybody's religion or politics or anything else. I just want to give you the economic lens on this. 86% of the knowledge workers in this country, which is the single most important asset for all these high-profile companies we want to keep trying to get in here, 86% of those workers say they do not want to work in a place that is not accepting and providing opportunities. They don't want to see voter restrictions. They don't want to see sexual identity restrictions. They don't want to see reproductive rights and all that. So again, politics aside, I'm not talking about politics. As a simple matter of economics, 10 years from now, those folks can say where a company locates. Because if you can't get those workers, you can't come. I mean, it's that simple. You know, you can't give enough incentives or anything. They don't. They have to have that workforce. If we want to have that workforce in Texas, we have to take another look at those things. And our cities, and Fort Worth's done a good job with this, our cities have to adopt programs that say, hey, you know, we're going to be accepting here. But you still have to deal with the fact that, you know, they're going to have to deal with the state at some point. And so, you know, but that's another real issue. But that's a big issue we have to deal with, and education is a huge issue. On those very happy notes, if they'll give me any time, I'll take some questions. If not, thank y'all very much, regardless. Ken says I can take a couple of questions. Dave's pretty much shot anyway. Yes, sir. Let me bring you this microphone. I got my instructions from the back. They're watching me.
Thank you. Really fascinating conversation. Fort Worth, of course, wants to be a high-tech capital. I mean, it wants to be Austin with the jobs, but not Austin with anything else. That's sort of its thing. So how do you see it gets there? What is it? I mean, education, obviously, but what else? How else would you?
That's a very good question. How does Fort Worth get to be a high-tech hub? Basically, I mean, other than the obvious education thing, and it is, you know, I think you have a lot to offer here. And I think to some extent it's a case of kind of harnessing that stuff and trying to mark together, because you, as I said, you have the best art, sports, amenities, cultural activities in anywhere in this state by a long shot, and those folks like that. You know, be a very, very, very livable community. That's probably the single most important thing you can do long term, is be a very livable community, the kind of community those folks want to go for. Otherwise, I mean, you know, you have some things going for you. You're not landlocked, and I think that's a very good long-term advantage. Dallas is pretty hemmed in there right now, and you keep seeing this growth to the suburbs and all that. You're not landlocked. You know, Alliance is a nice magnet to pull some things in. We were on that thing back when it was a cow pasture. It was when the first time Ross took me out there to look at it. But so we got to be, you know, on the ground floor of that one, which was very exciting. But Alliance is something of a magnet. But again, I think you have a lot of assets, and I haven't studied this in depth. A good friend of mine, I think Tom Stellman, has worked with you guys, with the community here in terms of some planning and that sort of thing. And Tom, his company's very, very good at that. But I think there's, to a certain extent, a little more differentiation from Dallas, because this is a unique place, and I think it's a place that could attract a lot of people. And I've often think about it, and I mean, I have a very special place in my heart for Fort Worth. Literally, I don't know if you know this or not, Ken, but when my favorite aunt, when I was a kid growing up over in rural East Texas, lived in Fort Worth, owned a beauty shop next door to Bob Boland's card shop. That's how, you know. So I've known Fort Worth politicians for a very, very, very long time. But anyway, but you know, the way I've often characterized, in fact, I put it in a book one time years ago. Dallas and Fort Worth could just as well be 200 miles apart. It is a fluke that they are 30 miles apart. Dallas was the railhead headquarters of the cotton industry. Fort Worth was the end of the cattle trails. You know, and you know, one of them's southern, one of them's western. And obviously grown together over time, done a lot of things, but there's a very distinct and I think very attractive culture to Fort Worth that doesn't always get to shine through as much as I would like to see it. You know, so I think there's a lot to be marketed about Fort Worth. I think there's a lot, you know, again, I think the workforce investment, all those are very important, but having available land and keeping that workforce and then getting the word out that this is a different place, you know, is very important, because there's absolutely, I mean, you have universities, you have the stuff you need to support this sort of thing. You have good universities, you have good, you know, you have a lot of very positive things going on, great, phenomenal amenities. I mean, when you look at the theme parks, the sports facilities, and by Fort Worth, I'm talking about Fort Worth Metro now, pulling in Arlington and all that stuff, you know, but you have just a whole lot of things going for you, and you have, again, that energy sector, which is itself going to become more and more and more technological over time, you know, and that's the other thing. I think sometimes you have to broaden your definition of what high tech is to some extent too, because it's very different. But I think though, I mean, you know, again, there's no reason why you can't. Dallas gets a lot of headlines, but you know, part of the issue there is, and again, I'm not knocking Dallas. Dallas is a great community, but if something goes to Frisco or McKinney or Plano, the headlines in the national press are that it came to Dallas, you know. I mean, and you know, frankly, if it came to Fort Worth, that might be the headline that it came to Dallas. You got to work, you know. I think that's something that establishing that true identity, but that this is a unique and different place. It's not a bedroom community, and you've never been that. But you know, all those others kind of, although they've developed a lot more, like Frisco in particular. We did an economic development study for them when they started. They had 7,500 people. You know, now they have 200,000 or something. It's crazy. But you know, develop a separate identity that's really a unique identity to this area. Something I've always felt like was missing a little bit, because it is such a great place. It really is. One more, I assume.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure. Okay, then you get one too, because he didn't get the last one.
You touched on this a while ago, but the economy of Russia is smaller than the economy of the state of Texas. Am I correct? How do they afford to fight this war?
Yeah, they can afford to fight the war because of oil and gas. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, you know, John McCain a number of years ago made a very profound statement about that, and it's, you know, it's simple but true in his way he could do things. He said Russia's a gas station. I mean, that's really what it is when you get right down to it. You take I mean, you know, Texas, we think we're dependent on oil. 15% of our economy is based on energy. 85% of our economy is based on energy. I mean, they are an energy economy. That's why I say if we can, over time, you know, take away the hold they have on Europe with natural gas, they're no longer a factor. They're one more country, one more middle-sized country out there among the many. Like I said, if this was a quiz show and I asked you to name the leaders of 5 of them, I don't think anybody in this room could do that. He'd be on that list, but for what we, that one thing, but again, you can't solve that overnight, unfortunately. And when Europe's talking about weaning themselves from their oil, which it's going to be painful, but it may be possible. They can't wean themselves from their gas yet, because we can't get ours over there fast enough, and there's not enough other immediate sources. But over time we can. Yeah, you had a question.
So when we think about Texas as a whole, when it comes to bringing businesses in and the growth, you look at companies like Tesla, for example, and then the EV industry within the next 5 years or so as it's trying to improve. I'm getting hit every day on the stock market with EVs, so I'm really interested in that. But the electric grid that we currently have now, what type of investment do you think we need to invest in that electric grid, and what impact would that have on the economy right now, taking into consideration what the long-term goal could be?
Full disclosure before I answer that one, I am currently working with 3 companies who are trying to do things on the electric grid. I was on the task force that designed the current system, and so I just want to say all that up front. It won't affect what I say at all. What we have to do, we can have an electric market. We can have a market for power. What we have to do, and I'll say 2 of us told them that 20 years ago, and they would not do it. The legislature wouldn't do it. I was one. The other one was Pat Wood. Some of you know Pat. Maybe he was Bush's chairman of the Public Utility Commission when he was governor, and then when he became president, he was head of FERC. And he's now working for the Hunt companies on putting batteries on the grid. That's what he's doing. But Pat is the single smartest guy on energy I've ever met in my life. I mean, he really is. Good old Port Arthur boy. But anyway, what we both told him was, when we set up the grid, what we did not do, the big fallacy that we did not do, we did not create a capacity market. And I'm going to have to get in the weeds just a little bit here. But the only way you make money in Texas selling power, if you're in the competitive part of Texas, the only way you make money selling power is when you actually sell power. You don't make any money for having extra power on hand. Back in the old regulated utility days, they'd always build 120, 130% of what they needed. And, the rates would be set where they got a rate of return on that capital investment. I mean, it was the old rate of return, rate regulation. So we built in extra capacity. Now, if you're not selling power, then you don't get money. So there's no incentive to build a heavy-duty base plant when most of the time renewables and combined cycle natural gas can meet all the power needs we have most of the time, because it's just going to sit there all the time, not making money. We could have set at a level, okay, we need this much extra capacity, then set up a market, let folks bid on it, we'll provide this, and then you're under an obligation to always have that power available. If you're able to sell some on the side, that's fine, but you have committed to, basically like the old-fashioned way, having some extra power around. If we did that, we could still have a competitive market and a viable grid.
So that's why Tesla's considering that approach.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why Tesla's considering that approach, and that's why and the thing is that the reason the legislature wouldn't do it, and it's typical political stuff. It would raise your rates just a little bit, because you'd have to be paying enough to keep that extra power around in case you needed it. So you'd have to pay a little bit more every month for that, and that's why they wouldn't do it. That's why they wouldn't do it. And they said, well, we need to worry about it because we've got all these coal plants sitting around and all these other old plants sitting around, legacy plants and all that. We don't need that stuff. Well, what happened in February when they tried to crank up those plants that hadn't run in 20 years? Didn't work out so well. Things wear out over time. And we didn't structure the market right on day one. And unfortunately, it really came up to bite us recently. And so, I mean, that's the fundamental thing we need to do to fix the grid, to fix the power situation. We should seriously consider. I don't think it's an absolute necessity, but we should seriously consider more linkages. We have a few, but consider more linkages to the other grids in the country. We are a self-contained grid for 85% of the state, and it serves us well for some purposes. But we should consider being able, in a thing like happened last February, being able to, pull in some power from other places. We should really consider that, because I mean it's ridiculous for the state that produces 40% of the energy in this country not to have enough electric power. That's ridiculous. It really is. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, every time there's going to be a little bit cold or a little bit hot, they say, "Oh, let's be careful right now." We shouldn't have to do that. I I mean, you know, we should have it designed where there's extra capacity. And as I say, the old-fashioned way did it that way, and you didn't even know you were paying for extra power. They just approved a plan. It was 120% of what you needed, 130% of what you needed. You paid. They set the regulator set a rate. You paid it, and you didn't even know it. You know, when they went to competitive market, they did not keep that piece of it, and that was a big fallacy at the time. And like I say, a couple of us tried to tell them, but boy, were we outvoted and outshouted. I mean, it wasn't even close. You know. On that happy note, thank y'all very much.
Ray, thank you for coming. I told you it was going to be special, and I think it certainly has been. We really appreciate you coming and being here.